Tonight we open with a small clay tablet broken at the edges, patient as stone. You're not standing in a palace or beneath a golden sky. You're standing in a museum storage room where ancient dust seems almost awake. In 2023, researchers working with Mesopotamian collections continued studying fragments from Iraq, including tablets held in major museums and universities. Scholars at Oxford, Yale, and the British Museum have long shown that these small pieces of clay preserve some of humanity's earliest written memories. And yet, the oldest words do not begin cleanly. They begin halfway through. They speak as if the story has already been unfolding for ages, as if gods, cities, floods, and workers are already known to everyone. Tonight we step toward that quiet problem. What came before the Anunnaki? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as the room grows darker, write your location and local time below. It is strangely comforting to imagine others listening in the same soft darkness. You picture the tablet beneath a careful lamp, its wedge marks pressed by a reed long vanished. The surface is not smooth. It rises and sinks like dried river mud, carrying the touch of a person who never imagined you. Perhaps he was a scribe. Perhaps he was tired. Perhaps his hand ached from copying older words already ancient in his own day. The mainstream record confirms that writing first developed in southern Mesopotamia during the late 4th millennium before the Common Era. It began with accounts, lists, offerings, animals, grain, labour, and temple goods. Not prophecy at first, not poetry, mostly administration, which is delightfully human and a little disappointing. Even at the dawn of writing, someone was counting sheep and making sure nobody stole the barley. Still, inside those practical marks, something larger waits. The earliest tablets belong to a world where memory is becoming solid. Before that, stories lived in voices, smoke, ritual, and repetition. They passed from one mouth to another beside hearths and canals. They changed shape every time someone remembered them. When later scribes wrote of the Anunnaki, they were not inventing from empty air. They were gathering old religious ideas, royal traditions, temple customs, and inherited fears. A debate remains open among historians over how much of these divine stories preserves real cultural memory. Some scholars treat them mainly as theology, while others see echoes of social change, environmental stress, and older ritual systems. You do not need to choose yet. The night does not demand certainty. It only asks you to notice the layers. Far beyond the glass case, southern Mesopotamia stretches flat beneath a pale moon. The land is low, warm, and restless. Rivers divide into channels, marshes breathe under stars, and reeds whisper with insects. The air smells of wet clay, fish, smoke, and trampled straw. Somewhere a dog barks once, then silence returns. Long before recorded history, people lived here without writing their names. They built with mud, repaired with mud, buried their dead beneath floors, and watched the rivers change their minds. They knew that water could feed them. They knew it could erase them. So when the later texts speak of divine powers descending into human affairs, you sense another possibility. Maybe the gods arrived late in the written story because the sacred was already old. Older than kings, older than temples, older than the name Anunnaki. A quirky fringe idea claims that the Anunnaki were visitors from the stars, remembered through distorted myth. Professional historians do not accept that as evidence, but the idea persists because the tablets feel unfinished. They feel like doors, and doors invite all kinds of footsteps. Yet the real mystery may be stranger than the fantasy. Not aliens in shining metal, not thunderous beings landing in fire. Instead, a deeper human inheritance, slow and shadowed, buried inside ritual habits thousands of years old. You look again at the tablet. Its broken lines do not answer you. They only suggest that civilization did not wake suddenly one morning beside the Euphrates. It stirred, it gathered, it learned to count, plant, remember, obey, mourn, and build. Then, at last, it learned to write down what it feared losing. And already, by then, the story was old. Your mind drifts toward a land without city names, where the map is still unfinished. There are rivers, but no royal inscriptions beside them. There are marshes, but no temple hymns rising above the reeds. There are paths made by feet, animals, baskets, and memory. You move through early Mesopotamia in a time when the southern plain is still becoming itself. The earth feels soft near the water, then hard and pale beneath the sun. The air carries the scent of salt, mud, fish, and dry grass. Nothing here looks empty, it only looks unrecorded. That is different. Archaeologists working across Iraq have shown that human settlement in this region reaches far deeper than the first written tablets. Long before Sumerian cities flourished, communities were already learning how to live with a landscape that changed constantly. Rivers shifted, marshes expanded, dry ground appeared, then vanished again. A house might stand proudly for years, then sink back into the plain. You feel the difficulty of it under your feet. This is not an easy cradle. It is a place that demands attention. People here must watch the season, the water, the sky, the animal, and the mood of the soil. A careless family might lose seed grain. A careless village might lose its fields. So the first civilization does not simply rise from abundance, it rises from negotiation. The land gives, the land argues. Scholars at the University of Chicago and Oxford have long studied how irrigation, farming, and settlement transformed the ancient Near East. One mainstream fact is clear. By the time the first cities appeared, people had already spent thousands of years experimenting with crops, herds, storage, and shared labour. Civilization is not a sudden invention. It is a habit repeated until it becomes a world. You pass a low shelter of reeds and packed earth. Inside, someone grinds grain with steady pressure, stone against stone. The sound is dull, circular, almost sleepy. Nearby, children chase one another between baskets. An old woman repairs a mat with fingers that know the pattern better than thought. A man watches the waterline because the waterline is never just scenery. It is food. It is danger. It is tomorrow. In such places, you begin to understand why later people imagined great powers behind the rivers. The channels seem alive. They split, wander, flood, retreat, and leave shining skins of silt behind them. A river does not need a face to feel like a will. It only needs to decide whether your field survives. Modern debates continue over how much climate pressure shaped these early communities. Some researchers emphasize environmental instability, while others point to trade, ritual cooperation, and social organization. The question remains open because the evidence is scattered and often silent. Silence is stubborn. It does not confess easily. Yet silence is not emptiness. It is full of small human acts. A hand presses clay around a storage jar. A child learns which reeds cut the skin. A burial is made beneath a floor, keeping the dead close to the breathing. No king commands this. No divine assembly records it. Still, something important is happening. People are learning to stay, and staying changes everything. When humans stay, they remember more precisely. They build storage rooms, then rules around storage. They mark boundaries, then argue about boundaries. They create rituals to bless fields, protect children, calm the dead, and explain misfortune. They begin to think not only of survival, but of order. Order is a quiet invention. It begins with where the grain is kept. It grows into who may touch it, who counts it, who receives it, and who speaks for the unseen powers believed to guard it. A quirky tidbit sometimes mentioned by enthusiasts of ancient mysteries is the idea that the first sacred places were built to imitate the marsh itself. Reeds became columns, platforms became artificial islands, and temples later rose like memories of dry ground in a watery world. It is not a proven master plan, and of course, but the suggestion has a certain strange poetry. You can almost see why it survives. The marsh teaches architecture, it teaches height. It teaches that safety may depend on raising yourself above the flood. In the evening, the sky turns copper, then violet. Smoke rises from cooking fires in thin strands. The smell of roasted fish mixes with damp vegetation and animal dung used as fuel. It is not romantic, exactly. It is human, which is usually more interesting. You hear sandals scrape against packed earth. You hear a baby fuss and then settle. You hear insects thicken in the reeds. No one here says the word Anunnaki. No one has carved the names that later generations will preserve. Yet you sense the first ingredients of that world forming slowly around you. Dependence on forces larger than the village. Labour organised by season. Reverence for places where offerings are made. Fear of flood, drought, sickness, and hunger. These are not minor things. They are the roots of gods. Perhaps, in such a landscape, divine beings are not imagined all at once. Perhaps they gather from repeated anxieties. A river becomes more than water. The sky becomes more than weather. The earth becomes more than soil. The dead become more than memory. And humanity begins speaking to everything it cannot control. That is where the older mystery deepens. What came before the named gods may not have been a lost empire with jewelled towers. It may have been a long sacred atmosphere, carried by farmers, hunters, herders, fishers, and mourners. A world where the boundary between practical work and ritual action hardly existed. You plant, you pray, you repair the roof. You bury the child. You try again. The first civilization may have begun not with conquest, but with repetition under a difficult sky. Each repeated act left a trace. Each trace became custom. Each custom became memory. And memory, given enough generations, begins to look like destiny. Night settles over the plain. The river reflects a few uncertain stars. Somewhere in the darkness, people sleep near their stored grain, their tools, their animals, and their dead. They do not know they are living in the deep foundation of a story later scribes will only partly understand. They do not need to know. The mud remembers for them. For a moment, it feels as though the ground itself has learned to hold a memory. You stand beside the first mud walls, low and uneven, warming beneath the morning sun. They are not impressive in the way later monuments will be impressive. No polished stone shines here. No carved lions guard the threshold. Yet these walls are doing something more intimate. They are separating inside from outside. That single idea changes the human world. Inside, there is shade, grain, sleeping mats, tools, and the faint smell of smoke. Outside, there are fields, animals, strangers, insects, heat, and the shifting breath of the marsh. A wall does not conquer the wilderness. It simply asks the wilderness to wait at the doorway. It is a modest request. Sometimes the wilderness refuses. Archaeological records from early farming settlements across the Near East confirm that mud brick became one of the most important building materials in ancient village life. Scholars from institutions such as Yale and the University of Pennsylvania have studied how these communities used packed earth, reeds, clay, and straw to create houses that could be repaired again and again. That is the secret of mud. It breaks, but it returns. You watch someone press wet clay into a rough shape, then set it beneath the sun. The brick is ordinary, almost dull. Still, in that brick lies a new kind of patience. A family can repair a roof, a neighbour can help raise a wall, a child can grow up beside the same doorway and know it as home. Settled life makes memory heavier. When people move often, memory travels in bodies, songs, scars, and portable objects. When people stay, memory gathers in corners. It clings to hearths. It sinks beneath floors. It stains thresholds with repeated footsteps. A house becomes a container for time. You enter one of these early homes. The ceiling is low. The light is dim, and the air is warmer than outside. A clay bin holds grain carefully protected from mice. A stone blade rests near a woven basket. The floor is hard beneath your feet, polished by use rather than design. Near the wall, a small figurine sits where a hand placed it long ago. No label explains it. That is inconvenient. History enjoys doing that. A quirky fringe tidbit often discussed by enthusiasts concerns the small prehistoric figurines, especially those with exaggerated eyes, bodies, or animal features. Some imagine them as evidence of strange visitors or forgotten priesthoods. Archaeologists are more cautious, suggesting household ritual, fertility symbolism, protection, play, teaching, or identities we cannot fully recover. The little figure remains silent. Its silence feels almost deliberate. The rise of village life is not merely a technical achievement, it is a social experiment. Once people live close together, they must manage irritation as much as irrigation. Someone wakes too early. Someone takes too much grain. Someone's goat ruins a planted patch. Someone claims a storage jar was promised to their cousin, which is exactly the sort of sentence that proves civilization has arrived. Rules begin before law codes. They begin as expectations. They become habits, then obligations, then punishments, then stories explaining why the rules were always sacred. Here the hidden timeline deepens. Before famous kings and divine assemblies, people are learning the emotional grammar of civilization, cooperation, resentment, debt, memory, inheritance, and obligation all grow in the narrow spaces between houses. A village may look peaceful from a distance. Up close, it is a delicate machine made of people who must keep forgiving one another enough to survive. The first mud walls also create privacy. Privacy creates secrets. Behind closed-reed doors, families speak of illness, marriage, hunger, jealousy, and dreams. They whisper to the dead beneath the floor. They place offerings where no stranger can judge them. Religion may not yet be organized as a grand temple system, but it lives in gestures repeated at home. A pinch of grain, a cup of water, a hand pressed to the earth. Mainstream research in journals devoted to ancient archaeology has shown that early village communities often buried selected dead near or beneath domestic spaces. The practice varied widely, and scholars continue to debate its meanings. Some interpret these burials as ancestor veneration. Others see household identity, land claims, grief, or practical tradition woven together. The debate remains open because bones do not explain affection. They do not tell you whether the living felt comfort, fear, duty, or love, but you can feel why the dead might stay close. In a fragile world, ancestry offers depth. It says this family has been here. This hearth has a past. This patch of earth is not random ground. It has received names, tears, and bodies. From such beliefs, later divine worlds may slowly grow. Not suddenly, not cleanly. A remembered grandmother becomes a household guardian. A dangerous storm becomes an angry force. A fertile field becomes a blessing. A storage room becomes a sacred trust. The unseen presses gently against daily life until ordinary actions acquire invisible witnesses. You step outside as the day rises. The village is awake now. Smoke rises from many hearths. Dogs circle the edges. People move with baskets, tools, and sleepy expressions that feel almost modern. Someone laughs at something rude. Someone complains about the heat. Someone has clearly lost a useful object and blames everyone nearby. Even ancient people had mornings. This is important to remember. The first civilizations were not built by symbols alone. They were built by aching backs, sore hands, hungry children, patient elders, and the endless nuisance of maintenance. A wall must be patched, a roof must be sealed, a canal must be cleared, a jar must be mended. The sacred does not float above these tasks, it hides inside them. Perhaps this is why later myths imagine humans created for work, not because ancient people lacked imagination, but because work was everywhere. Labour ordered the world, labour fed households, labour supported ritual, labour transformed mud into walls, grain into bread, marsh into settlement, and settlement into memory. The old question becomes softer here. What came before the Anunnaki? Hands came before them. Hands shaping clay, hands lifting reeds, hands planting seed, hands carrying the dead, hands building small rooms where darkness could feel safe. Before the great gods entered written tradition, human beings had already built the stage on which divine stories could appear. Evening returns with a slow purple light. The walls cool. The grain bins darken. The village settles into murmurs, coughs, soft speech, and the patient breathing of animals. You stand at the threshold of a mud brick house and feel the strangeness of it. Civilization begins here, not as thunder, but as shelter. A little wall, a little fire, a place to return. The scent of baked clay changes as your mind enters the Ubaid world. It is a drier scent now, touched by kiln smoke, reed ash, and river dust. You see painted bowls arranged near a wall, their dark lines curving across pale surfaces with quiet confidence. The design seems simple at first. Waves, bands, triangles, looping forms. Then they begin to feel like a language that has forgotten its own alphabet. This is not writing yet. It is older than writing. Across southern Mesopotamia, archaeologists identify the Ubaid period as a long cultural horizon that shaped the land before the rise of Sumerian city life. Scholars from the University of Chicago and Oxford have described Ubaid communities as crucial to the formation of later temples, settlement patterns, and social hierarchy. The clay is already speaking. It simply refuses to speak plainly. You walk through a settlement where houses are larger than the earlier village shelters. Some buildings are arranged with greater planning, as though people are beginning to think in shared patterns. Rooms open into other rooms. Storage areas sit beside workspaces. Courtyards hold the softened traces of feet, baskets, and repeated tasks. The walls are still mud brick, but the mood has shifted. Here, life is becoming organized in a deeper way. Pottery styles spread across wide distances. Similar forms appear from one region to another, suggesting exchange, imitation, migration, marriage ties, or shared customs. Nobody can point to one single master command, yet the patterns are there, as calm and persistent as breath. This is how a culture spreads, not always through conquest. Sometimes it travels as a bowl shape, a house plan, a ritual habit, or a way of painting the edge of a vessel. You lift one of these imagined bowls in your hands. It is light, but it carries a world. Someone chose the clay, someone shaped it, someone painted it before firing, someone used it, broke it, discarded it, and left it for time to bury. Thousands of years later, a scholar sees the pattern and whispers the name Ubaid, a name given long after the people themselves were gone. That is one of history's small cruelties. Whole societies become known by labels they never used. They lived, argued, prayed, cooked, and slept beneath names that vanished with them. Then modern archaeology gives them a new name, useful and careful, but never quite intimate. Still, the Ubaid world leaves striking signs. Among the strangest are small figurines with slender bodies, elongated heads, and eyes that seem too alert. Some have been found in contexts that invite speculation, which is always dangerous and always irresistible. Fringe writers have imagined them as reptilian beings, ancient hybrids, or proof of forgotten non-human contact. Naturally, the figurines do not clarify the matter. Very polite of them, mainstream scholars usually place these objects within ritual, symbolic, or social frameworks. They may reflect identity, protection, fertility, transformation, or ideas about bodies that no longer survive in words. The debate continues because their meanings are not written on their faces, even when those faces stare back with unsettling calm. You look at one in the dim light, its eyes seem awake, not alive, exactly, but aware in the way old objects sometimes appear aware. The neck is long, the shoulders narrow, the body feels more like a sign than a portrait. You sense how easily such an object could become a doorway for later imaginations. Yet its real power may come from human uncertainty. The Ubaid people lived in a world where households, rituals, and emerging sacred centres were slowly binding communities together. Some sites reveal buildings that appear larger or more formal than ordinary homes. These may be early temple structures, or special communal buildings, or places where offerings and authority began to meet. Scholars continue to debate whether these buildings represent true temples in the later Mesopotamian sense. Some argue for early institutional religion, while others prefer a more cautious reading of gradual social complexity. The evidence invites interpretation, then quietly steps backward. That is archaeology's favourite trick. It gives you just enough to wonder, in the heat of afternoon. You imagine people carrying baskets toward a raised building. The ground is packed hard. The sun presses on shoulders and backs. A child watches from a doorway as adults approach with grain, fish, woven goods, or small vessels. Nobody calls this taxation yet. Nobody writes an account in neat signs. But the movement matters. Goods are going somewhere. Authority may be gathering. A sacred centre does not need towering walls at first. It needs repetition. It needs people to agree or half agree that certain places receive offerings. Certain people handle the offerings. Certain gestures must be performed correctly. Certain stories explain why. This is where a hidden system begins to show its outline. Before the Anunnaki are named in elaborate divine families, before myths describe heavenly assemblies, the social machinery of sacred obligation is already forming. People are learning to focus labour around special places. They're learning that unseen powers can be served through visible institutions. That idea will become enormous. For now, it is still small enough to fit in a bowl. The Ubaid world also stretches across water routes and land paths. Boats move through channels, marshes, and coastal waters. Trade carries shell, stone, clay, ideas, and perhaps rumours. You imagine a traveller arriving with a painted vessel from far away. The shape is familiar, but not identical. People gather around it and pretend not to be impressed. They are absolutely impressed. Human beings have always enjoyed pretending otherwise. As twilight enters the settlement, pottery cools near the kiln. Smoke hangs low. The air tastes faintly bitter. Somewhere, a ritual begins with no written hymn to preserve it. Feet move toward a special building. Hands offer something ordinary that has become more than ordinary because of where it is placed. A bowl, a little grain, a silence. You begin to understand that the Ubaid shadows are not shadows because they were unimportant. They are shadows because they stand behind the lamp of writing. Later scribes will illuminate kings, gods, floods, and cities. But behind that light waits this older world of painted pottery, staring figurines, raised buildings, and customs spreading across the plain. Perhaps this is what came before the Anunnaki. Not one forgotten race, not one lost capital. A slow cultural deepening, where human communities taught themselves to see order in clay, authority in buildings, and mystery in objects shaped by hand. The divine story would later receive names. Here, it still moves without them. Night gathers over the settlement. The painted bowls lose their colours in the dark. The strange figurines keep their silent watch, neither confirming nor denying anything. In that refusal they remain powerful. They remind you that some beginnings do not announce themselves. They sit in the earth for thousands of years, waiting for someone to notice the shape of a shadow. A cooler wind moves across the plain as Eridu rises from the edge of memory. You approach it not as a finished city, but as a sacred centre slowly gathering weight. The ground is pale. The air smells of salt, reeds, fish, and sun-baked clay. In the distance, a mound lifts above the flatness like a thought returning again and again to the same place. Eridu is one of the oldest known cities in southern Mesopotamia. Excavations have shown long sequences of temple building there, with later shrines resting above earlier ones. Scholars from the University of Pennsylvania and the British School of Archaeology helped bring this layered sacred history into modern view. The fact is simple, but it feels enormous. People kept rebuilding holiness in the same place. That is not casual behaviour. That is devotion with foundations. You stand near the earliest sacred buildings and imagine them as they might have been. Not glittering towers, not vast courts filled with royal banners, but modest spaces of mud brick, raised and repaired with care, a platform, a room, an altar, a place where offerings could be brought, arranged, removed, and remembered. The temple is still small, the idea is not. In later Mesopotamian tradition, Eridu becomes associated with wisdom, deep waters, creation, and the god Enki. The stories are written much later than the first occupation layers, and historians remain careful about connecting myth directly to archaeology. Yet the association lingers like moisture under the soil. Eridu is remembered as ancient even by people who were themselves ancient. That should make you pause. When an old civilization calls something old, you're standing near a very deep well. A scholarly debate continues over whether Eridu should be seen as the first true city, the first sacred centre, or one important settlement among several. Some researchers emphasize its ceremonial role. Others point toward changing settlement patterns across the wider region. The argument stays open because early urban life did not arrive wearing a neat label for future professors. How inconsiderate of it. Still, Eridu carries a special atmosphere. You can sense why later generations look back toward it. A city at the edge of marsh and desert feels like a meeting place between worlds. Dry land ends. Water begins. Birds lift from reeds. Fish flicker beneath the surface. Clouds of insects tremble in the evening light. Everything seems half-formed. Everything seems watched. You imagine a line of people approaching the shrine at dusk. Their sandals brush dust from the path. A basket of grain rests against one hip. A clay vessel holds oil, beer, or fish. No one moves quickly. The pace is deliberate, because sacred places teach the body to slow down. Inside the shrine, the air is different. Cooler, perhaps. Darker, certainly. The smell of clay walls mixes with smoke, stored food, and old offerings. A priestly figure may stand there, though you should not picture robes too grandly. Authority at this stage may have been quiet, practical, and local. Someone knows the correct gestures. Someone keeps the place clean. Someone remembers which offerings belong where. That is how power begins. Not always with a crown, sometimes with a person who knows what must be done when everyone else is afraid to do it wrong. A quirky tradition from later Mesopotamian law says that Eridu was the first city to receive kingship from heaven. The Sumerian king list places it at the beginning of rule before the Great Flood. Historians do not treat those immense reigns as literal political record, but the tradition reveals something meaningful. Ancient scribes imagined order beginning at Eridu. That idea is a fossil of thought. It tells you what later people wanted the past to be. They wanted kingship to have a sacred origin. They wanted cities to descend from cosmic decision. They wanted the messy growth of human settlements to become a story with purpose. And honestly, who can blame them? Human beings prefer a beginning that sounds planned. Mud, hunger, and committee meetings are less elegant. Yet the archaeology of Eridu suggests something more subtle than mythic certainty. Temple levels accumulate across time, one built over another, as if each generation refuses to abandon the place. The old walls become buried beneath new walls. The shrine grows upward because memory grows downward. You see workers carrying mud brick in the heat. You see hands smoothing plaster. You see someone repairing a corner damaged by rain. The sacred is not only imagined, it is maintained. That is a strangely humble truth. Holiness leaks if the roof is neglected. The divine house cracks if no one patches the wall. The gods of later tradition may seem immense, but their earthly homes depend upon human labour. This is where humanity's role begins to sharpen. People serve the sacred centre. They feed it, clean it, rebuild it, protect it, and organise themselves around its needs. A temple can become a storehouse, a ritual space, an employer, a symbol, and a memory machine. It gathers goods and distributes meaning. It turns ordinary labour into cosmic duty. Perhaps that is why later myths imagine humans fashioned to relieve the gods of toil. The thought is unsettling, but also familiar. Anyone who has cleaned a sacred hall, a family kitchen, or an office no one appreciates may understand the ancient suspicion that higher powers enjoy delegation. There is gentle sarcasm in the mud. As night comes, Eridu becomes quieter. The marsh darkens first, then the paths, then the low walls. Stars appear in the still water, frogs call from hidden places. The shrine stands in the dimness, not high enough to dominate the sky, but clear enough to gather attention. You feel that this place is not merely inhabited, it is addressed. The world is being spoken to from here. The waters, the dead, the sky, the uncertain future. All are being answered with offerings, rebuilding, and ritual patience. The first sacred centre does not solve fear. It gives fear a room to enter. In that room, fear becomes ceremony. Ceremony becomes order. Order becomes history. Eridu remains difficult to grasp because it belongs both to archaeology and to later memory. One gives you walls, pottery, levels, and dates. The other gives you kingship descending from heaven and wisdom rising from deep waters. Between them lies the mystery, not as a contradiction, but as a slow blending of human need and remembered place. You stand at the edge of the mound and listen. The wind passes through reeds with a dry whisper. Somewhere beneath your feet, older floors sleep under newer floors, and beneath them, older hopes sleep deeper still. The Anunnaki have not yet stepped clearly into the story, but the stage is becoming sacred enough to receive them. The city waits in darkness. The water waits beside it, and the first great question settles softly into the earth. Who taught humanity to build a house for the unseen? The first-named gods enter softly, almost as if they are late to their own temple. You hear their titles before you see their faces. They move through hymns, lists, offerings, and stories copied by careful hands. The Anunnaki appear in the written imagination of Mesopotamia as powerful divine beings, linked with heaven, earth, judgment, kingship, and the hidden order of the world. Yet the clay does something curious. It rarely explains them from the beginning. The texts often speak as though listeners already know the divine family. Names arrive with confidence. Duties appear established. Temples already receive offerings. Priests already understand the gestures. It feels less like the birth of a religion and more like walking into a room where the conversation started long ago. You are the late guest. History smiles politely. Records from ancient Mesopotamia confirm that divine names and temple institutions developed across many centuries. Scholars at Yale and the University of Chicago have studied how Sumerian, Akkadian, and later Babylonian traditions preserved older religious layers while reshaping them for new cities, rulers, and languages. The gods did not remain fixed. They travelled through time. They changed clothing, rank, and emphasis as human societies changed around them. A local deity could become a great power. A forgotten name could sink into a list. A myth could be copied, edited, expanded, and made useful for a different age. Even eternity, apparently, needed administration. That feels very Mesopotamian. You imagine a scribe sitting near a clay lamp copying a list of divine names. The room is warm. The lamp smoke gathers under the ceiling. Outside, someone leads animals through a courtyard, and a gate creaks in the night. The scribe presses each wedge carefully, preserving names that may already be older than his city's walls. His work seems technical. It is also an act of rescue. Every copied name says that a memory should not vanish yet, but what kind of memory is being rescued? The Anunnaki are sometimes described as a group, sometimes as judges, sometimes as powers connected with the great gods. Their identity shifts according to period and text. This has created an open scholarly debate over whether the term originally meant a specific divine class, a broad sacred assembly, or a theological category that changed over time. The question remains delicate. Ancient categories refuse modern neatness. A quirky fringe tidbit, of course, claims that the Anunnaki were not gods at all, but ancient engineers from another world. The idea owes more to modern imagination than to professional Assyriology. Still, it clings to the public mind because the ancient texts speak in grand, unfinished fragments. They mention descent. They mention creation. They mention hidden knowledge. And humans are very good at building spaceships inside silence. The more grounded mystery is quieter and perhaps deeper. When the Anunnaki appear in writing, they seem to stand upon a platform built by older beliefs. Sacred centers already exist. Offerings already flow. Ancestor memory, river fear, fertility hopes, and temple labor have already shaped the human landscape. So perhaps the question is not only who the Anunnaki were, perhaps it is why they had room to appear. You walk through a temple district at dusk. The paving is uneven beneath your feet. The walls hold the day's heat. The smell of bread, beer, oil, and wool drifts from storage rooms. People carry goods toward an inner space, not because a myth is abstractly beautiful, but because sacred households must be fed. Gods in Mesopotamia often had houses. They had statues, garments, meals, attendants, festivals, and processions. This is a mainstream historical fact preserved in temple records and ritual texts. Divine presence was managed through material care, which sounds strange only until you remember that every human relationship also depends upon small acts of attention. You feed what you love. You also feed what you fear. The Anunnaki belong to this world of divine administration. They do not float in pure mist. They are part of a universe where heaven, earth, city, field, king, worker, and offering are tied together through obligation. The gods have rank. Humans have duties. Temples mediate the relationship. Everyone, seen and unseen, has a place in the arrangement. It is comforting. It is also slightly unsettling. A system that explains everything can also trap everything. You feel that tension as you stand near the inner court. A priest moves past with measured steps. He does not look dramatic. He looks busy. Sacred life has schedules, inventories and washings, recitations, and the inevitable problem of whether someone brought enough oil. The divine order rests upon human regularity. Perhaps this is why older layers matter so much. Before the written gods become complex families, people have already practiced obedience to place, season, and ritual. The Anunnaki did not need to invent ore. Ore was waiting for a name. They did not need to invent labour. Labour was already bending backs beneath the sun. They did not need to invent hierarchy. Villages, storehouses, and shrines had been quietly teaching it for ages. The gods arrived into prepared earth. That thought changes their mystery. Instead of imagining them as the starting point, you begin to see them as inheritors. They inherit the fear of rivers, the memory of floods, the discipline of storage, the authority of sacred buildings, and the human urge to explain why work must continue. Long before recorded history, the world had trained people to look upward and inward at once. The sky could withhold rain, the soil could fail, the dead could trouble dreams, the temple could demand grain. Into this web came divine names, like stars appearing in a sky that was already dark. You listen as a hymn is murmured in the distance. The words are too far away to understand, but the cadence feels old. It rises and falls, not hurried, not loud. A few people pause, others keep working, because reverence and daily effort are not separate here. That may be the most ancient truth of all. The sacred does not interrupt life. It organizes it. The Anunnaki. Then, maybe late only from your modern point of view. To the people who named them, they were not late. They were always already there, folded into the older fabric of things. Myth has a way of placing its own beginning beyond reach. It says, this was so before you were born, before your city, before the flood, before memory. And perhaps that is how religions protect their depth. They move their roots into darkness. Night settles over the temple walls. The scribe finishes one line, then begins another. A divine name enters clay, firm and permanent for a while. Outside, the river moves without reading it. The reeds sway without caring. The stars keep their distance. The gods have arrived in words, but the silence beneath the words is older, in your ears. The echo changes into the sound of names recited in order. One name follows another, each one placed carefully in a chain of rule. Kings rise, kings vanish. Cities receive power, then lose it. Time stretches beyond comfort, widening into reigns so long they feel less like politics and more like weather. You are listening to the Sumerian king list. It is one of the strangest historical texts ever pressed into clay. It records rulers of Mesopotamian cities and presents kingship as something that descends from heaven. Scholars at Oxford, Yale, and the University of Chicago have studied versions of this text as both political memory and sacred storytelling. The list does not begin modestly. It begins with kings before the flood. Their reigns last thousands of years. One ruler governs for a span that makes ordinary life seem like a candle flame. Another follows, equally impossible by normal human measure. City after city holds kingship as if rule is not merely government, but a heavenly object passed from hand to hand. It feels calm. It feels impossible. That impossibility is part of its power. The text is not a modern chronicle, and historians do not treat those vast reigns as literal biography. Yet the list preserves a profound idea. Civilization, in the minds of ancient scribes, had a time before disaster. Order existed before ruin. Kings ruled before the great breaking of the world. This is where the hidden timeline becomes unsettling. The flood divides memory. On one side lies the recognizable world of historical cities, rulers, conflict, and rebuilding. On the other side lies a dim age of extraordinary reigns, sacred origins, and names that feel half human, half symbolic. The list does not explain that older world. It simply places it there, like a door left standing in fog. You follow the line of kingship to Eridu, then to other ancient cities. The names sit in clay with heavy dignity. A scribe who copied them may not have understood every layer he preserved. He may have trusted the tradition because tradition itself carried authority. That is how old memory survives, not because everyone understands it, because someone refuses to let it disappear. A mainstream historical fact anchors the mystery. The Sumerian king list exists in multiple copies and recensions, including examples studied in major museum and university collections. These versions differ in details, showing that the tradition was copied, adapted, and used across time for political and theological purposes. So the list is not simple, it is alive in the ancient sense. It changes while claiming to preserve what was always true. A quirky fringe tidbit has grown around those long reigns. Some writers claim the enormous numbers prove that the kings were non-human, celestial, or descended from beings older than humanity. Professional historians are more careful, connecting the numbers with symbolic time, sacred arithmetic, political exaggeration, and mythic prestige. Still, you understand the temptation. A reign of 28,800 years does not sound like a mayoral term. It sounds like a dream wearing a crown. The debate among scholars remains open over how to read the antediluvian kings. Some interpret them as mythic ancestors of kingship. Others see them as reflections of older city traditions gathered into one ideological sequence. A few emphasize the list's role in legitimizing later rulers by making kingship appear cosmic, ancient, and divinely controlled. The clay offers no footnotes. Very rude of it. You imagine the recitation taking place in a dim chamber. A student sits cross-legged, repeating names under the watch of a teacher. The teacher corrects him when he stumbles. Outside, the sun burns white on brick walls. Inside, the past is being shaped into a pattern the living can use. A list seems plain, but lists are powerful. They decide what belongs. They make disorder look arranged. They place fragments into sequence and suggest that chaos had an author. The Sumerian king list does exactly that. It takes scattered memories of cities, dynasties, divine favour, catastrophe, and succession, then turns them into a single long breath. Kingship descends. Kingship moves. The flood comes. Kingship descends again. You feel the rhythm in your body. It is almost like a tide. Order arrives from above, rests on earth, is interrupted by water, then returns. This pattern will echo through many ancient traditions, because people often understand history through loss and renewal. The world breaks, the world resumes, yet the question remains. What did the scribes imagine before the flood? Was it only mythic time, a sacred preface to history? Or did it preserve, in distorted form, a memory of older settlements, older leaders, older catastrophes, and older structures swallowed by the instability of the plain? It is possible that both are true. Human memory does not separate fact from meaning as neatly as modern shelves separate books. A real flood can become a cosmic flood. A remembered leader can become a king of impossible years. A ruined settlement can become the end of an age. The ancient mind does not lie exactly. It magnifies. You stand now in a world made of magnification. The kings are too old. The reigns are too long. The flood is too complete. Yet beneath the exaggeration, there may be a real anxiety about the fragility of order. Cities can fail. Rivers can bury fields. Dynasties can vanish. Names can be forgotten unless pressed into clay. So the list presses hard. It insists that civilization has depth. It insists that human order belongs to a chain older than any living king. It whispers that rule is not merely seized by men with weapons, but granted by a hidden structure beyond them. That idea is useful to rulers. Of course, conveniently useful. Ancient politics was rarely shy about borrowing heaven's stationery, but the idea is also emotionally powerful. It comforts people after disaster. If kingship can descend again, then ruin is not final. If order existed before the flood, then the present world is not the first attempt. Humanity is living inside a repeated design, one that has already survived destruction. The night grows softer around the clay. You see the tablet lying beneath lamplight, its columns carrying names from a world that may never have existed as written, yet clearly existed as memory. The kings before the flood remain unreachable. They are too formal to be ghosts, too strange to be ordinary rulers, too meaningful to dismiss as nonsense. They stand at the edge of history. Behind them, something older breathes. Perhaps what came before the Anunnaki is hidden not in a single lost civilization, but in this ancient insistence that civilization itself had earlier cycles. A city before the city, a kingship before the known kings, an order before the recorded order. A world remembered only because later scribes believed the present needed an ancient shadow. The names continue in silence. The flood waits within the list, and the first civilization begins to look less like a beginning than a return. A layer of pale silt lies quietly beneath the story, thin as a sleeping breath. You kneel in the imagination of an excavation trench, where earth has been cut into a clean wall. Different colours show different moments. Ash, clay, packed floor, broken pottery. Then, suddenly, a band of water-laid sediment, smooth and strange, as if the river once entered without asking permission. The flood is no longer only a myth here, it is also mud. At several ancient Mesopotamian sites, archaeologists have found flood deposits from different periods, including famous layers at places such as and Shurapak. Researchers from major institutions have long debated how these local disasters relate to later flood traditions preserved in Sumerian, Babylonian, and biblical literature. The important word is local. That word disappoints people sometimes. It should not. A local flood can destroy a whole human world if that world is your village, your fields, your dead beneath the floor, and your children sleeping near the grain jars. A flood does not need to cover the planet to become total in memory. It only needs to cover everything you love. You feel the air grow damp. The sky lowers. In the distance, the rivers change colour, thick with carried soil. Birds rise in nervous bursts from the reeds. Dogs bark at water where no water should be. People shout from rooftops, from boats, from doorways already filling at the threshold. The first sound is not thunder. It is confusion. Then comes a slap of water against walls, the crack of wet brick, the groan of storage bins giving way. Grain turns heavy and useless. Pots roll. Mats float. A child is lifted above the brown current. Someone tries to save a goat, because humans are tender and absurd even in disaster. The flood does not explain itself. It simply arrives. In later Mesopotamian stories, the flood becomes a cosmic judgment, a divine decision, a cleansing, a reset, a secret told to one chosen survivor. The details vary across traditions, but the emotional pattern remains powerful. Humanity is nearly erased. One line continues, the world begins again under a quieter sky. A mainstream fact anchors this pattern. The Babylonian flood story of Atrahasis and the flood episode in the Epic of Gilgamesh preserve older Mesopotamian traditions about divine anger, human survival, and the rebuilding of life after catastrophe. Scholars at Yale and Oxford have studied these texts as essential witnesses to ancient ideas of mortality, kingship, and divine control. Yet the scholarly debate remains open over how much real flooding shaped these narratives. Some researchers connect the stories to repeated river disasters in southern Mesopotamia. Others emphasize literary inheritance, theological meaning, and the tendency of cultures to transform disaster into cosmic drama. Perhaps the answer is braided. Water leaves sediment. Memory leaves myth. A quirky tidbit from the world of ancient speculation imagines a single enormous prehistoric flood wiping out an unknown advanced civilization. leaving only scattered survivors to teach later peoples. Professional archaeology does not support such a neat lost empire. But the idea keeps returning because floods are perfect servants of mystery. They erase evidence while creating stories about erasure. Very convenient. Suspiciously convenient. Still, water truly does erase. Mud brick dissolves. Reed houses collapse. Wooden things rot. Footprints vanish. Even human grief can leave no mark unless someone later tells the story well enough for others to remember. You stand beside the trench wall and touch the pale band of silt. It feels innocent. That is what makes it unsettling. There is no scream inside it, no preserved face, no written complaint. Only fine sediment laid down by water, then sealed beneath later occupation. After the flood, people returned. They rebuilt. They walked above the disaster until it became buried ground. This returning matters. Civilization is not only the ability to build, it is the ability to rebuild after the world has contradicted you. Again, humans raise walls. Again, they plant fields. Again, they tell children where the water came from and why they must never forget. The explanation may change. The warning remains. Perhaps this is how the flood entered the hidden timeline. First, it was a memory of loss. Then it became a boundary between ages. Then it became a theological hinge, separating the immense kings before the flood from the shorter reigns of the world that followed. The disaster didn't merely drown land, it divided time. Before, after, a soft dread gathers in that division. People need such lines because the past is otherwise too wide. The flood gives memory a doorway. It says that something ended there. It says that what came before belongs to a different order, more distant, more powerful, less accountable to ordinary measure. You hear rain now, imagined but steady. It taps on reed roofs. It darkens packed earth. It fills old channels. People glance upward, calculating danger from the smell of the air. Ancient life teaches this attention. Every cloud is information. Every wind shift matters. The sky is not scenery. It is a message that may arrive too late. The flood myths also reveal something about divine character. The gods can be disturbed by human noise, angered by imbalance, moved by pity, or bound by decisions they regret. These stories do not present divinity as simple comfort. The sacred world is powerful, but not always gentle. That is an older truth and doctrine. Power may protect you. Power may also drown you. This tension helps explain why temple offerings, rituals, and obedience became so central. If unseen powers could shake the world, then human beings needed patterns of appeasement. Feed the gods, honor the rites, keep the order, maintain the fragile bridge between mortal settlement and forces beyond settlement. In that sense, flood memory strengthens civilization. Fear becomes structure. Ritual becomes insurance. A canal is cleared not only because crops need water, but because disorder must be held back. A shrine is repaired not only because walls crack, but because the relationship with the unseen must not crack. A story is repeated not only to entertain children, but to teach them that the world has ended once, and could do so again. The trench grows darker as evening comes. The silt band fades into the surrounding soil. It is no longer easy to see where disaster begins or ends. That feels honest. Catastrophe rarely stays in one clean layer. It enters stories, customs, numbers, prayers, and the way people look at clouds. You rise slowly from the edge of the excavation. The river moves somewhere beyond the plain, calm for now, carrying moonlight on its surface like nothing ever happened. That is the river's oldest cruelty. It destroys, then becomes beautiful again, and humanity forgives it. Because humanity needs it, because the field must be watered, the child must be fed, and the house must be rebuilt on ground that may remember drowning. So the flood beneath the myth remains both evidence and warning. It does not prove every legend exactly as told. It does not erase the cautious work of scholars. It simply whispers that ancient people knew disaster, and that disaster could become the shape of time itself. Beneath the sacred stories, water once entered the world, and somewhere in the mud, the older age went quiet. The morning returns with the slow scrape of baskets against packed earth. You stand beside a canal where workers gather in the soft grey light. Their feet sink slightly into damp mud. Their hands are already dirty. The air smells of river water, sweat, reeds, and grain dust, the honest perfume of a world that survives by repetition. No one here looks heroic. That may be the point. The earliest civilizations depended upon organized labor, not only kings and myths. Records from Mesopotamia confirm that temples and households tracked grain, animals, workers, rations, fields, and offerings with careful attention. Scholars from Yale, Stanford, and the University of Chicago have studied these records as evidence for the deep connection between economy, religion, and social order. The sacred world needed workers. The human world needed bread. Between those needs, civilization tightened its knot. You watch people clear silt from a canal. The work is heavy and dull, which means it is historically important. Water must be guided or the fields fail. Banks must be repaired, or floodwater takes the wrong path. Channels must be opened at the proper time, or seeds dry beneath a cruel sun. Civilization is mostly maintenance. Nobody puts that on a monument. A supervisor calls instructions, though not with royal grandeur. More likely, he sounds tired. Someone complains, someone laughs, someone pretends not to hear. A young man leans on his tool for too long and receives the ancient look that all lazy workers have received since time began. Some traditions never change. In the temple economy, offerings did not float down from heaven. They came from fields, herds, workshops, and kitchens. Grain was harvested, counted, stored, baked, brewed, and redistributed. Wool was shorn, cleaned, spun, woven, and recorded. Fish were caught, salted, carried, and placed where the divine household required them. Every sacred meal had human fingerprints. This is where the old creation stories become quietly unsettling. In some Mesopotamian myths, humans are formed to take over labor once carried by lesser gods. The idea appears in traditions where divine beings grow weary of toil, and humanity is made to bear the work of the earth. It is not a cheerful origin story, but it is a practical one. You were not made for leisure, it suggests. You were made for tasks. A scholarly debate remains open over how these myths reflect actual social realities. Some historians read them as religious explanations for temple service and agricultural labour. Others see deeper reflections of class, obligation, and the burden carried by ordinary people within early states. Either way, the myth feels close to the ground. It smells of mud. You follow a worker returning from the canal toward a settlement. His shoulders are stiff, his palms are scraped. He receives a ration, perhaps grain or beer, measured according to systems recorded on clay. The transaction is ordinary, but it reveals a structure. Labour becomes countable. Countable labour becomes manageable. Manageable labour becomes power. The tablet does not need to shout. It only needs to list. A quirky fringe idea claims that ancient humans were created as a mining or labour species for beings who descended from the sky. Professional historians reject such readings as modern invention. Yet the idea borrows its emotional force from real Mesopotamian myths of labour and divine demand. The fringe version is loud. The older myth is quieter. The quieter one is stranger. It says the universe itself may be arranged like a household. The gods receive. Humans provide. Temples organize. Fields obey when they can. Rivers assist when they feel generous. Kings stand between heaven and earth, claiming to secure the balance. Workers stand beneath the sun, making the balance edible. That system is not merely economic, it is cosmic. You enter a storage building where grain lies in bins. The air is warm and thick with dust. A scribe marks amounts with calm concentration. His reed stylus presses small signs into clay. He records what enters, what leaves, and who receives a share. A little tablet can become a net. It catches movement. It catches obligation. Once recorded, a debt becomes harder to deny. Once measured, a worker becomes part of a larger design. This does not mean every person was crushed by the system. Ancient communities also offered security, identity, shared festivals, food distribution, and belonging. But the same structure that feeds can also command. That double nature runs through civilization like a hidden channel. The temple provides meaning, but it also requires service. The city protects, but it also counts. The gods bless, but they must be supplied. Humanity becomes central to the sacred order, yet never entirely free from it. You hear women grinding grain in a courtyard. The rhythm is steady, stone moving over stone. Children carry small bundles. An elder inspects a jar seal. A baker shapes dough. A brewer tends a vat with careful attention. The gods may be unseen, but their breakfast has a schedule. There is gentle comedy in that. There is also reverence. To feed a god is to participate in the maintenance of the world. The offering may be consumed by priests, redistributed to dependents, or transformed through ritual meaning. However it moves materially, it tells everyone that the divine household stands at the center of human effort. Perhaps humanity's role was never imagined as simple slavery or simple worship. Perhaps it was service woven with fear, gratitude, habit, and dependence. You work because the field demands it. You offer because the temple expects it. You obey because order feels safer than chaos. You complain because you are human. Then you return the next morning and do it again. The sky brightens. The canal shines. A line of workers moves across the plain with tools on their shoulders. From far away, they look almost ceremonial, like figures in a slow procession. Up close, they're tired, hungry, practical, and alive. That is the hidden dignity of them. Before myth becomes theology, labour becomes civilization. Before the divine system can be described, hands must build it every day. The first cities do not rise only from vision. They rise from blisters, ledgers, rations, debts, offerings, and the stubborn need to keep water moving where crops can drink. You begin to sense why ancient people told stories in which humans were made for work. They lived in worlds where labour held back hunger, flood, disorder, and divine displeasure. Work was not merely something people did. It was the bridge between mortal weakness and cosmic stability. The evening comes again with tired bodies and low voices. A worker washes mud from his arms. A child sleeps near a basket. The temple storehouse cools in the falling dark. Somewhere, a tablet hardens, preserving an amount of barley, a ration, a name, a duty. It looks small. It is enormous, for in those counted measures, humanity enters the machinery of the ancient sacred world, not as a decorative detail, not as an accident, but as the necessary hands of order. The gods may command from heights the text never fully explain, but the world below is kept alive by people who dig, carry, count, bake, and return. And in the silence after work, the first civilization breathes. The pattern of 7 appears quietly, like a mark repeated in dust. You notice it first in the sky, where wandering lights move differently from fixed stars. Then it appears in stories, rituals, lists, cities, sages, gates, and sacred arrangements. The number does not always mean the same thing. Ancient numbers rarely behave politely. Still, 7 returns often enough to feel intentional. It has the patience of a drumbeat. You stand beneath a dark Mesopotamian sky, where the horizon lies flat and wide. The stars seem lower here, scattered above the marshes like seeds on black cloth. Without city glare, the heavens are not a background. They are a presence. They watch, they turn, they measure. Records confirm that Mesopotamian scholars became skilled observers of the sky, developing systems of omen reading, calendars, and celestial interpretation. Later Babylonian astronomy would become famous for its precision, and modern historians of the institutions such as Brown, Yale, and Oxford have studied how deeply skywatching shaped ancient intellectual life. Yet before careful tables and trained scholars, there is wonder. There is the shepherd looking upward. There is the priest waiting for a sign. There is the farmer asking whether the season will hold. The number 7 begins to feel like a way of placing the restless world into a shape the mind can carry. 7 visible, wandering bodies mattered in later ancient cosmology. 7 gates appear in mythic descent. 7 sages are remembered as culture bringers. 7 often marks completeness, danger, transition, or sacred structure. Not always neatly, never too neatly. That would ruin the fun. A quirky fringe tidbit claims that every ancient use of 7 hides a secret code from lost teachers older than recorded civilization. Scholars do not accept such sweeping claims, but the repetition is still fascinating. Human beings often discover meaning through recurrence, and recurrence can become sacred before anyone writes a theory about it. You hear soft footsteps near a temple court. Oil lamps tremble. A low chant begins, not loud enough to wake the whole city, but steady enough to hold attention. Perhaps 7 offerings are placed. Perhaps 7 names are spoken. Perhaps 7 days are counted toward a festival. The exact rite changes. The habit of ordering remains. A scholarly debate remains open over how much numerical symbolism in early Mesopotamia reflects inherited prehistoric patterns. Later, scribal theology, or practical counting systems gradually surrounded by sacred meaning. Some researchers emphasize mathematics and administration. Others emphasize ritual imagination. Many suspect both work together, because ancient people rarely separated usefulness from mystery as cleanly as modern minds try to do. You look toward the temple platform. It rises in stages, each level built from mud, brick, and memory. The structure is not only architecture, it is a diagram made habitable. The lower world, the human city, the divine height, the turning sky, all begin to align inside one built form. Even when later towers grow grander, the impulse feels older than grandeur. Raise the sacred. Mark the centre. Give the invisible a place to stand. This system of repeated forms shapes how people understand history. Cities are not only settlements, they become sacred stations. Gods are not only personalities, they become offices within a cosmic arrangement. Kings are not only powerful men, they become appointed figures within an order said to descend from heaven. The world becomes layered. That is the important shift. A person living inside such a system does not see random events in quite the same way. A drought may be divine displeasure, a victory may be heavenly favour, a strange birth, a comet, a cracked statue, or a dream may enter the logic of signs. Nothing is merely itself. Everything may point beyond itself. How exhausting! How comforting! You walk through a city where the gates are closing at dusk. The smell of bread rises from ovens. Donkeys complain in the lanes, because donkeys have always understood drama. A child watches smoke curl upward and asks why the stars appear one by one. An elder answers with a story, not because the story's a laboratory, but because it gives the night a shape. That is what systems do. They make fear legible. The hidden order of 7 may also connect to the remembered sages known in later tradition as culture bringers before the flood. These figures is often counted as 7, are said to have taught arts, crafts, ritual, or wisdom to humanity. Whether they preserve memories of priestly ancestors, mythic teachers, or symbolic categories remains uncertain. The uncertainty matters. It keeps the door open without forcing it wide. If the earliest civilization arose through long development, then these sacred numbers may represent humanity's attempt to compress centuries of learning into memorable patterns. How do you explain irrigation, brickmaking, ritual, kingship, astronomy, and writing to later generations? You do not list every tired worker and careful experiment. You tell of sages. You arrange them in a sacred number. You give memory a form. The form survives. The details fade. This is not deception in the simple sense. It is preservation through beauty. Ancient cultures often saved knowledge by placing it inside story, number, ritual, and repetition. A list could become a ladder. A number could become a key. A city could become a cosmic signpost. You sense that civilization is learning to think symbolically about itself, not merely to live, not merely to build, to interpret. And interpretation may be one of humanity's oldest burdens. Once people believe the world contains signs, they must keep reading. The river, the sky, the dream, the illness, the broken jar, the number of days, the timing of an eclipse, all may matter. The world becomes a text written in events. No wonder scribes became important. Someone had to pretend they understood the handwriting. Night deepens over the plain. 7 bright lights are not all visible at once, yet the idea of heavenly order gathers above you. The temple lamps below resemble smaller stars, fixed by human hands. Between sky and city, a silent resemblance forms. Above, celestial order. Below, ritual order. Between them, human beings counting, fearing, hoping, and arranging. This may be the system beneath the later divine stories. Before the Anunnaki appear as named powers within elaborate myth, people are already searching for patterns that bind Earth to heaven. They're gathering repeated numbers, sacred places, ritual cycles, and remembered teachers into a structure that can hold anxiety. The structure is never complete, but it is strong enough to inherit. A system does not need to be invented in one moment. It grows where repetition meets belief. You feel the calm of that thought, not certainty, but rhythm. 7 lamps, 7 names, 7 gates, 7 remembered teachers. 7 as a way of saying that the world has hidden rooms, and that humanity may enter them only through order, patience, and careful speech. The last light fades from the western sky. The stars now dominate the plain. Somewhere, a scribe closes a tablet. Somewhere, an offering cools. Somewhere, a child falls asleep while an elder explains that the world is held together by patterns too old for any single person to see completely. Perhaps that is what came before the gods as written figures, a pattern waiting for names, a sacred arithmetic of fear and hope, a hidden order, slowly reconstructed from sky, city, ritual, and memory. A thin light gathers at the edge of the water, silver and uncertain. You stand where marsh reeds lean over a quiet channel, and dawn has not fully arrived. The air is cool against your skin. It smells of wet plants, fish scales, clay, and distant smoke from hearths beginning to wake. Then the water moves, though no wind crosses it. A figure appears in the old imagination. He's not quite a man. He's not quite something else. Later Mesopotamian tradition remembers strange sages called the Apkallu, figures associated with wisdom, ritual knowledge, and the age before the flood. Records from ancient texts and art confirm that these beings were linked with culture, protection, and sacred instruction. Scholars at Yale, Oxford, and the University of Pennsylvania have studied them as part of Mesopotamia's deep tradition of learned myth. They arrive like teachers from a forgotten morning. Some are imagined with fish-like forms, some are connected with bird-headed protective figures. Some stand between the human and divine worlds, carrying buckets, cones, gestures, and mysteries modern eyes cannot fully decode. They seem to belong to thresholds, water and land, human and God, memory and dream. Thresholds are dangerous places. They're also where knowledge enters. You watch one step from the river mist, not as a monster but as a symbol given shape. The reeds tremble around him. The first birds stir. His presence is calm, almost ceremonial. He does not shout commandments. He does not shake the sky. He simply stands as if he knows something human beings once needed to learn. How convenient, really. A supernatural tutor appears just when civilization requires instruction. A quirky fringe tidbit claims these sages were survivors from a vanished advanced world. Crossing the flood with secret knowledge, professional historians remain cautious, placing them inside myth, ritual, priestly identity, and symbolic memory. Yet the image persists because the Apkallu seem to answer a deep question. How did fragile humans learn so much? How did mud become temple? How did signs become writing? How did fields become cities? The scholarly debate continues over whether the Apkallu preserve memories of real priestly specialists, mythic culture heroes, or symbolic guardians of ancient knowledge. Some researchers connect them to learned scribal traditions. Others emphasize their protective role in ritual art, where figures of sages guard doorways, palaces, and sacred spaces. They do not belong only to the past. They stand watch over boundaries. You enter a house where small protective images may have been placed beneath floors or near walls. The room smells of plaster, straw, and old smoke. People live here with the ordinary fears of illness, bad dreams, infant death, jealousy, accident, and unseen harm. Against such fears, this sage becomes more than a story. He becomes protection made visible. The cone in his hand may suggest purification or blessing. The bucket may hold sacred substance. The exact meaning remains debated, but the gesture feels deliberate. It says that the world needs tending. Evil, disorder, and decay are not defeated once. They're brushed back again and again, like dust from a threshold. That's a very old kind of wisdom. It does not promise perfection. It promises maintenance. The Apkallu carry a memory of knowledge as something received, guarded, and transmitted. In later texts, sages teach kings, establish rituals, and preserve order. They're not merely clever individuals. They are part of a chain. Wisdom comes from before, passes through chosen figures, and enters human institutions. This makes civilization feel borrowed, not invented exactly. Borrowed from deeper waters. You stand in the half-light, listening to the marsh. Frogs pulse softly among the reeds. A bird calls once, then again. Somewhere behind you, a village wakes, unaware that your mind is filling the dawn with semi-divine teachers. But this is how myth works. It places invisible meaning over visible life until the ordinary begins to shimmer. A scribe learning signs becomes a student of ancient wisdom. A priest washing a statue becomes heir to a sacred pattern. A builder laying brick participates in knowledge older than his own hands. Mainstream historical study confirms that Mesopotamian scholarship valued antiquity intensely. Scribes copied old compositions, preserved lists, and linked learning with tradition. Knowledge did not gain honour by being new. It gained honour by being old, tested, received, and connected to the gods. That is almost the opposite of modern advertising. Ancient wisdom did not need a fresh logo. The older it sounded, the better. The Apkallu fit beautifully into this world. They explain how culture can be both human and more than human. They allow later scholars, priests, and kings to imagine themselves not as inventors, but as custodians. This is important. A custodian does not create truth from nothing. A custodian keeps the lamp burning. Yet there is an unsettling edge to the story. Some traditions suggest that later sages after the flood were more human, less perfect, or less directly divine. The earliest wisdom belongs to a time closer to the beginning, closer to lost order, closer to the powers beneath creation. As time passes, knowledge becomes weaker, or at least more distant from its source. That idea feels mournful. It says history is not always progress. Sometimes it is forgetting arranged beautifully. You look again toward the water. The imagined sage fades as the sun rises. His outline dissolves into reeds, brightness, and bird movement. Yet the question he leaves behind remains. Did early civilizations remember their own teachers as divine because learning felt miraculous? Or did ritual specialists deliberately clothe their authority in myths older than kings? Perhaps both paths meet. A community that depends on irrigation, ritual calendars, building techniques, healing practices, and written records must honor those who know. Knowledge becomes sacred because ignorance can kill. A mistaken season can ruin crops. A broken rite can frighten a household. A lost sign can erase a debt, a hymn, or a name. Wisdom is survival with ceremony around it. The Apkallu stand at this meeting point. They are strange because knowledge itself is strange. It arrives inside human minds. But no single person owns its beginning. Everyone learns from someone who learned from someone else. Follow that chain far enough, and it disappears into darkness. Myth gives that darkness a face, or a fish skin. Ancient art, always helpful in its unsettling way, sometimes shows protective beings with hybrid features. Modern viewers find them uncanny, but ancient viewers may have seen guardians, purifiers, or embodiments of disciplined sacred power. The figures remind you that humanity's first civilization did not separate beauty from fear. A guardian can be frightening. That is partly the job. By late morning, the marsh shines in full light. The world becomes practical again. Nets must be checked, bricks must dry, grain must be counted, children must be scolded gently, or not so gently, depending on the child. Yet beneath daily tasks, the idea of transmitted wisdom continues to move. Someone knows the chant, someone remembers the measure, someone teaches the sign, someone guards the doorway, and perhaps that is what the sages truly represent. Not proof of vanished empires, not visitors from distant stars, but the deep human awareness that civilization depends on knowledge no one living fully created. It is inherited, fragile, and always at risk. The dawn has become day. The water is ordinary again. Still, in the mind's quiet edge, the Apkallu walk at dawn, carrying the memory of instruction from a time no longer remembered. They do not answer every question. They deepen it. They suggest that before the famous gods stood the teachers, before the teachers stood the waters, and before the waters stood a silence into which humanity listened carefully. The earth grows older beneath your feet as Mesopotamia widens into the deep human past. You move away from the river cities and drift toward colder hills, limestone ridges, open plains, and forgotten settlements where no Sumerian word has yet been spoken. The air changes. It carries wild grasses, animal musk, wood smoke, and the sharp scent of stone warmed by daylight. Here, the mystery steps backward, not into emptiness, into another kind of fullness. At Gobekli Tepe in southeastern Anatolia, archaeologists uncovered monumental stone circles dating thousands of years before the first Mesopotamian cities. Research associated with German and Turkish excavation teams has made the site central to modern debates about ritual, gathering, and the origins of complex society. Long before writing, people were already carving pillars, shaping symbols, and returning to special places with extraordinary effort. The old timeline bends. Temples may not have waited for cities. That thought is quiet, but powerful. For a long time, many imagined that farming villages led to towns, towns led to cities, and cities led to temples. Yet sites like Gobekli Tepe complicate the order. Ritual gathering may have helped pull people together before full urban life emerged. Belief may have built the road, then people followed it. You stand among tall stone pillars, their surfaces carved with animals, foxes, snakes, birds, wild boars, and other creatures seem to move in the half-light. Their bodies not random decoration. They feel watchful, tense, and symbolic, although no written explanation survives. The stones are silent, and not in a friendly way. They keep their own counsel. Scholars from Stanford, Oxford, and other major institutions continue discussing how early ritual sites reshaped the story of civilization. Some emphasize communal feasting and seasonal gatherings. Others focus on social cooperation, ancestor symbolism, or the role of skilled ritual specialists. The debate remains open because the stones speak through images, not sentences. Images are generous. They are also evasive. A quirky fringe tidbit claims Gobekli Tepe was built by survivors of a lost high civilization after a cosmic disaster. Professional archaeology does not accept that dramatic conclusion, but the site still feels astonishing without it. Ordinary hunters and early farming communities were capable of extraordinary planning, labour, and symbolic imagination. That should be enough wonder. Humans are strange enough. You walk slowly around one of the stone enclosures. The ground is uneven. Your hand rests near a carved animal whose meaning has vanished. Perhaps it represents danger. Perhaps a clan. Perhaps a spirit. Perhaps something so specific that modern categories stumble at the threshold. There is no city here in the later sense. No palace. No tax office, mercifully. Yet people gathered, worked, carved, ate, remembered, and returned. They created a place that required shared effort across time. That is already a form of civilization, even if it lacks streets and writing. It is civilization as ceremony, not bureaucracy. Farther west, your mind drifts to Catalhoyuk, a large Neolithic settlement in Anatolia where people lived in densely packed houses entered through roofs. Excavations led by major university teams, including researchers linked with Stanford, have shown a world of household art, burials beneath floors, wall paintings, and complex daily life. There, too, the story refuses to be simple. People lived close together without the obvious markers of later kingship. Their houses held memory, labour, ritual, and the dead. Wild bull imagery and painted scenes suggest symbolic richness, although interpretations remain debated. Was it a town, a ritual community, a dense village, or something between categories? The label matters less than the feeling. Human life had become layered. You imagine climbing down through a roof opening into a dim room at Catalhoyuk. The air smells of hearth smoke, plaster, stored food, and human closeness. Light falls from above in a pale square. Beneath the floor lie ancestors. On the wall, painted shapes watch daily routines of cooking, sleeping, making tools, and repairing surfaces. No god is named, yet meaning is everywhere. This is the important widening. Before Sumer, before written divine assemblies, before the Anunnaki enter clay, human communities across the ancient world were already making symbolic spaces. They were arranging the dead, painting walls, building ritual centers, carving animals, gathering for feasts, and shaping landscapes into memory. The sacred did not begin with writing. Writing caught it late. A scholarly discussion continues over whether these prehistoric ritual worlds directly influenced Mesopotamian religion, or simply reveal a broader human capacity for symbolic organization. Some researchers trace networks of exchange and shared practices across regions. Others warn against drawing straight lines through thousands of years of change. Caution is wise. The past dislikes straight lines. Still, patterns remain tempting. Raised places, special buildings, buried dead, animal symbols, communal meals, skilled ritual actors, repeated return to sacred ground. These appear again and again in different forms, like dreams that change faces but keep the same mood. Perhaps what came before the Anunnaki was not one civilization at all. Perhaps it was a vast human apprenticeship. People learned how to gather around the unseen. They learned how to transform stone, clay, bone, plaster, and memory into shared meaning. They learned that a place could become powerful if enough bodies returned to it, enough voices spoke there, enough dead rested beneath it, and enough fear gathered around its edges. The first civilization may have many mothers. Some lived beside rivers, some carved stone in highlands, some painted walls and crowded houses, some left only pits, bones, hearths, beads, and silence. Your footsteps slow across an older landscape. Wind brushes dry grass against your legs. In the distance, vultures circle above a ridge. A fire burns low near a gathering place, and people sit around it without writing their thoughts. Their faces glow and fade as flames move. Someone tells a story about an animal, a death, a warning, a beginning. The story is lost. The need for it is not. Long before recorded history, humans were already asking how to live with danger, death, hunger, weather, memory, and the unseen pressure of the sky. They answered with places. They answered with images. They answered with repeated acts that made fear bearable. Mesopotamia would later give these forces names, temples, tablets, and divine genealogies. But the older human world had already prepared the emotional ground. It had already taught people that meaning could be built, buried, carved, painted, and fed. The sun rose over the ancient hills. Stone pillars cast long shadows. A roof opening darkens above a crowded house. Somewhere between them lies a question too old for any single language. Did civilization begin when people built cities, or when they first gathered to honor what they could not see? The answer remains soft. It may be both, and perhaps that is why the Anunnaki feel like late arrivals to a much older ceremony, one that began in stone, smoke, bone, and silence, long before Sumer's voice rose from the clay. Cold stone waits beneath a sky that has forgotten every builder's name. You stand before a monument raised before writing, before royal praise, before a king could order his victories into clay. The stones do not explain themselves. They do not tell you who planned the work, who carried the weight, who argued about placement, or who ruined everyone's morning by saying the pillar leaned slightly. Someone always notices that. The place feels older than speech, although speech must have filled it. Orders were given, songs were sung, jokes were made. Complaints rose into the air with dust and sweat. Monumental architecture was never silent when it was being built. Only later does it become silent. Archaeology confirms that large stone ritual structures existed long before the first cities of southern Mesopotamia. Research from major universities and scientific journals has shown that complex gathering, planning, and symbolic building began in some regions during the late hunter-gatherer and early farming worlds. This matters deeply. It means human imagination learned to build upward before writing learned to remember. You walk around the base of a carved pillar. Its surface is rough in places, smoothed in others by tools and time. Animals appear upon stone, not as decoration for comfort, but as presences. A snake coils without sound. A bird seems held in permanent attention. A wild creature steps forward from the ancient mind and refuses to leave. These stones are not houses. No one sleeps here comfortably. No one stores onions in the sacred enclosure, unless they are very confused. Instead, the monument gathers bodies for another reason. It requires people to come together, share labour, carry food, plan seasons, and perhaps bury or close the structure when its purpose changes. A building like this is not only made of stone, it is made of coordination. Coordination is civilization in its younger clothing. A mainstream historical fact is clear. Many prehistoric monuments were created by communities without writing, coinage, or formal states. Scholars at Stanford, Oxford, and the University of Cambridge have explored how ritual labour could generate social bonds before kingship became dominant. The old assumption weakens. Temples may not be the child of the city. Sometimes the temple is the lure that teaches people how to become a larger community. You feel that possibility in the stone. People return because the place matters. They remember where to stand, when to gather, what to bring, what not to touch. They may feast nearby. They may honour the dead. They may seek protection from animals, ancestors, spirits, or forces without fixed names. The names are missing. The pattern is not. A scholarly debate remains open over whether these early monuments were primarily ceremonial, social, territorial, funerary, or seasonal. Some researchers emphasize ritual feasting. Others suggest ancestor memory, hunting symbolism, or emerging leadership. The stones allow several answers to stand nearby, like quiet guests refusing to leave. This is the burden of ancient stone. It lasts longer than explanation. A quirky fringe tidbit says monuments before writing were built by a vanished master race that taught humanity sacred geometry. Professional archaeology finds no need for that claim. The evidence points instead to human communities with patience, skill, memory, and stubbornness. Stubbornness deserves more credit in history than it usually gets. Great works often begin with someone saying, "Unfortunately, we can do this." You imagine the workday. Men and women gather before sunrise. Tools strike stone with a steady rhythm. Dust sticks to skin. Someone brings water. Someone tends a fire. Children watch from a distance, learning that certain places demand effort beyond ordinary need. The monument teaches without words. It says that some labour is not for hunger. Some labour is for meaning. This idea travels far. In many parts of the ancient world, people create structures that exceed simple survival. Stone circles, burial mounds, platforms, enclosures, and ritual buildings all reveal the same strange human tendency. Once food is uncertain, shelter is fragile, and death is constant, humans still spend precious energy making places for the invisible. Very practical creatures, obviously, and yet that impracticality may be the source of civilization's depth. A granary stores grain, a ritual monument stores shared attention, a wall protects bodies, a sacred enclosure protects memory, a path connects houses, a ceremonial route connects the living to ancestors, animals, seasons, and sky. You stand at the centre of the stones as evening lowers. The air cools, the shadows lengthen. A distant bird cries over the plain. Without lamps, the darkness arrives honestly, filling gaps between pillars until the carved animals seem to move. This is how belief enters architecture. A place feels different when the light changes. The first monumental builders understood, perhaps without needing to say it, that stone could shape fear. It could hold people still. It could turn the sky into a ceiling and the earth into a floor for sacred action. It could make time feel gathered, compressed, and watched. Before writing, memory needed bodies. It needed repetition. A ceremony performed once disappears quickly. A ceremony repeated at the same stone becomes tradition. A tradition repeated across generations becomes ancient truth. By the time anyone asks why the stones matter, the honest answer may be simple. They have always mattered. That phrase is powerful. It hides the beginning. In Mesopotamia, later temples of mud brick would rise on platforms and receive offerings through systems of labour and record keeping. But stone monuments from older worlds show that sacred construction did not require writing to begin. Humans had already learned that buildings could speak in weight, height, alignment, and absence. Silence can be architectural. A missing doorway can guide movement. A central stone can gather eyes. A carved animal can make the living feel watched by something older than themselves. This is one of the deeper threads beneath the first civilization. Before gods are named in tablets, sacred space is already training the senses. Walk here. Stop there. Look upward. Bring food. Lower your voice. Remember the dead. Fear the animal. Trust the circle. Return next season. The body learns before the text. The body obeys before the law. You feel your own steps slow as you leave the monument. That slowing is part of the design. The stones have changed your pace. They've made you aware of breathing, shadow, distance, and the old human wish for order beneath a sky that never explains itself. Perhaps this is what came before the divine names. Not doctrine, but placement. Not scripture, but stone. A world in which belief was not yet written down because it was walked, touched, carried, cooked, buried, lifted, and rebuilt. A world where ceremony may have gathered people before government controlled them, and where architecture may have taught the first lessons of shared obedience. The night settles across the monument. No tablet records the builders' names. Still, their intention remains in the weight of stone, in the spaces between pillars, in the animals carved into silence. They built before writing, but not before meaning. They lived before cities, but not before order. They vanished before history, but not before leaving history something enormous to explain. The stones do not answer. They endure. The long Neolithic dream begins with seed held in the palm. You feel its small weight before you see the field. A grain is almost nothing, yet it contains a bargain with the future. Place it in earth. Trust the season. Protect the young shoot, and perhaps the world will return more than it took. Perhaps. The word matters. Farming begins with hope, but also with anxiety. Wild foods move with the seasons. Herds wander. Rivers change. A planted field stays where it is, which means the people who depend on it must also stay close. The earth becomes a promise, and every promise becomes a source of fear. Research from major archaeological projects in the Fertile Crescent confirms that farming developed gradually across many communities. Scholars at Stanford, Yale, and Oxford have studied how wheat, barley, sheep, goats, and cattle became part of a new relationship between humans and landscape. It was not instant. Nothing important was. You walk beside a field at dawn, the soil is cool beneath your feet, dew clings to low plants somewhere nearby. A sickle blade catches the first light. The air smells of damp earth, crushed stems, animal breath, and smoke from a hearth where someone has already begun the day's work. Farming changes time. Hunters follow movement. Farmers wait. They wait for rain, sprouting, ripening, birth, milk, harvest, drying, storage, and return. Their lives become tied to cycles that must be watched carefully. A mistake in timing is not poetic. It is hunger with a calendar. So ritual grows naturally here, not as decoration, but as emotional technology. When the field is uncertain, people bless seed. When animals fall sick, people seek causes beyond the visible. When children are born, ancestors are remembered. When death enters the house, the living place it within patterns older than grief. A mainstream fact remains firm. Neolithic communities across Western Asia often combined farming with symbolic practices, household rituals, and careful treatment of the dead. Scientific journals have published studies showing how burials, plastered skulls, figurines, and ritual spaces appeared among early settled communities. The dead did not simply leave, they stayed in thought, in flaws, in memory, and sometimes in form shaped again by human hands. That is tender. It is also unnerving. A quirky fringe tidbit says that plastered skulls from the Neolithic preserve the faces of ancient priest kings from a forgotten world. Most archaeologists are more cautious, linking them to ancestor remembrance, household identity, grief, or ritual transformation. Still, imagine the sight by lamplight, a face remade after death, watching from the edge of the living room. Not exactly soothing interior design, yet perhaps it was soothing to them. The scholarly debate remains open over whether such practices were mainly about ancestors, social status, household continuity, or relationships between the living and the dead. The objects do not explain whether they were loved, feared, honoured, or needed. They simply sit between categories, refusing to become comfortable. You enter a Neolithic house where smoke stains the ceiling. The floor is hard and smooth from years of use. Tools hang near the wall. Grain rests in containers. A sleeping child curls beside a woven mat. Beneath this floor, someone may be buried, close enough that every meal takes place above memory. This is a world without sharp separation. Work is ritual. Home is tomb. Food is future. The mind changes inside such a world. People begin to think across longer spans. Seed kept for next season must not be eaten now. Animals must be bred, guarded, and counted. Children inherit not only tools, but places. Land begins to matter differently, because labour has entered it year after year. A field becomes history. A herd becomes wealth. A house becomes ancestry. These changes do not make life easy. Farming can increase labour, disease, inequality, and dependence on fragile crops. Researchers have debated whether early farming improved life, or made it harder in many ways. The old progress story has become more complicated, as good history usually does when someone actually checks the bones. Skeletons can be brutally honest. They show wear, diet, disease, and injury. The Neolithic dream is therefore not a gentle garden. It is a bargain. More food in some seasons, more work in many days. More children, perhaps, but more mouths to feed. More settlement, but also more conflict over land, water, animals, and stored grain. Civilization grows from this tension, not comfort alone. You hear a grinding stone turning again and again. The sound is slow, circular, and intimate. Grain becomes flour through effort so repetitive it feels almost ceremonial. Hands push stone over stone, shoulders ache, dust clings to hair and skin. Bread, that peaceful symbol, begins as endurance. Outside, goats bleat with theatrical bitterness. They have opinions. The people around you laugh, argue, tend fires, repair walls, and watch the sky. They are not waiting to become history. They are trying to get through the day. Yet each practical choice deepens the future. Storage leads to accounting. Herding leads to property. Property leads to inheritance. Inheritance leads to dispute. Dispute calls for rules. Rules invite authority. The chain is slow. It is also relentless. In this long dream, the sacred grows more structured because life itself is becoming more structured. Seasonal rituals match agricultural cycles. Ancestors anchor households to place. Feasting strengthens alliances. Exchange moves shells, obsidian, ideas, and stories across wide distances. The human mind learns to live in networks. A bead from far away tells a local child that the world is larger than the village. A borrowed ritual gesture hints that unseen powers may travel too. A new crop or tool changes not only work, but imagination. People become rooted and connected at once. That combination is powerful. It prepares the ground for cities. Perhaps what came before the Anunnaki was this long schooling of the species. The lesson was not written on tablets. It was written into bodies, seasons, storage pits, bones, fields, and hearths. Humans learned patience from crops, dependence from animals, hierarchy from surplus, and reverence from the dead beneath their homes. No single teacher stands at the beginning. The teacher is repetition. Evening lowers over the fields. Smoke softens the horizon. A woman carries water in a jar against her hip. A man closes a pen with careful hands. Children chase one another through dust, not yet knowing that their world is slowly changing the fate of humanity. The seed kept for tomorrow rests in darkness. The dead rest below the floor. The stars rise above the roof opening. And somewhere in this long Neolithic dream, the first outlines of civilization gather quietly, not as a sudden awakening, but as a deep sleep filled with work, fear, memory, and the stubborn hope that the earth will answer. A forgotten river moves beneath a country that no longer remembers its old name. You follow it in darkness, not by sight, but by the smell of damp earth and green growth. The banks are low, the current is slow. Somewhere frogs call from reeds, and night birds lift with soft wings from the water's edge. The world feels familiar, then it quietly becomes strange. Civilization did not rise in one place only. Archaeological research from universities such as Harvard, Yale, and Oxford confirms that early complex societies emerged in several river valleys, including Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus region, and northern China. Each grew through its own climate, crops, beliefs, and pressures. This is important. It loosens a story. Humanity's first civilization may not be a single flame passed from one hearth to another. It may be many small fires, some bright, some buried, some extinguished before their names were written. A river valley can gather people just as surely as a temple can. Water invites settlement. Silt feeds fields. Floods create risk. Risk creates planning. Planning creates authority. You hear that pattern again? Water, grain, storage, memory. Yet every river gives the pattern a different shape. Along the Nile, floodwaters came with a steadier rhythm, nourishing fields beneath a sky where desert and river formed a sharp boundary. In the Indus world, planned cities later rose with careful streets, drains, wells, and baked brick. In early China, river systems shaped farming, a ritual, and political power through landscapes both generous and dangerous. The mainstream fact is clear. River valleys encouraged dense settlement because they offered water, transport, fertile soils, and seasonal predictability. Yet scholars still debate how much rivers caused civilization, and how much human organization transformed rivers into engines of power. The debate matters. A river alone does not build a city. People do that, usually while complaining about mud. You move now through an imagined Indus street, wide and carefully planned. The bricks fit with disciplined precision. Drains run beneath or beside houses. Wells provide water. The air smells of baked clay, sesame oil, dust, and warm stone after sunset. No readable royal inscription announces a conquering king. No huge palace dominates the view. That absence is haunting. The Indus script remains undeciphered, and scholars continue debating its language, political structure, and religious life. This is one of archaeology's great silences. There are cities, seals, weights, crafts, trade, and planning. Yet the voices remain locked. A quirky fringe tidbit claims the Indus cities were guided by survivors of a global flood or star-born teachers. Professional researchers do not support that claim, but the mystery of an undeciphered script keeps imagination restless. When a civilization leaves signs you cannot read, it begins to look as if it is hiding on purpose. Of course, it is not hiding. You are simply late. You stand near a seal carved with an animal, perhaps a unicorn-like figure, though the word is only modern convenience. its body is strong, its horn elegant, its meaning uncertain. A person once pressed that seal into clay to mark ownership, trade, identity, or authority. The mark travelled farther than the voice, far away, in Egypt. Another river valley gathers a different dream. The Nile runs through desert like a dark ribbon of life. The smell is green water, papyrus, cattle, and hot stone. Here, kingship eventually becomes radiant and formal, wrapped in solar power, burial monuments, and divine order. Yet even Egypt has older roots. Before pyramids, there are villages, graves, pottery, cattle herders, and local sacred places. Oxford and American University research has shown that Egyptian state formation grew gradually from regional cultures along the Nile. Royal power did not fall from the sky fully dressed. It grew from older communities, symbols, exchange networks, and burial customs. Ancient kings often preferred the sky version. It sounds better. North and east, the Yellow River and other Chinese river systems carry another early world into form. Millet farming, later rice cultivation in other regions, walled settlements, ritual objects, and ancestral practices begin shaping a long tradition. Scientific studies have explored how climate shifts, agriculture, and social complexity interacted across Neolithic China. Here again, the pattern changes. Ancestors become central. Ritual vessels gain power, lineage, land, and authority deepen through repeated ceremonies. You feel the global mystery widen. If similar structures arise in different places, perhaps civilization is not one invention. Perhaps it is a recurring human response to pressure, wherever water, food, memory, labour, and fear gather densely enough. Society begins to crystallize. Not identically, never identically. Each valley dreams in its own language. The scholarly debate remains open over whether early civilizations developed independently, through long-distance exchange, or through a mixture of local invention and shared influence. Some connections are clear through trade and migration. Others remain speculative, because distance and time blur the evidence. Still, the echoes are difficult to ignore. Sacred kingship, ancestor reverence, flood memory, ritual centers, craft specialists, storage systems, measured labor. The pieces recur like a tune played on different instruments. You walk beside one of these lost rivers and imagine a settlement now gone beneath farmland, city streets, or desert sand. Its people knew their own names. They had private jokes, local gods, marriage arguments, favourite foods, and irritating neighbours. They may have believed their world was central, permanent, and watched by powers that cared deeply about their offerings. Then time passed. The river shifted. Their name disappeared. This is where the hidden timeline becomes humbling. What came before the famous gods may include cultures so early, so local, or so badly preserved that no grand title survives. Not every beginning leaves a monument. Not every sacred place becomes a city. Not every city leaves words that can be read. History is not fair. It preserves clay better than tenderness. It preserves stone better than song. A small floodplain village may have carried ideas that later bloomed elsewhere. A vanished trade route may have moved myths, beads, crops, and ritual gestures between people who never imagined a modern map. A forgotten burial custom may have shaped how descendants understood ancestors for centuries. You cannot recover all of it. That's part of the sorrow. Yet the fragments remain enough to change the question. Instead of asking for one first civilization, you begin to sense a family of beginnings. Mesopotamia is crucial, but not alone. The Anunnaki belong to one great river-born tradition, while other valleys shape their own unseen powers and sacred systems. Night thickens over the river. The water reflects a broken line of stars. Somewhere beyond hearing, Another ancient community tends a fire beside another bank, under another sky, speaking another language that no one alive can restore. They are not a footnote. They are part of humanity's first long experiment with order. The river moves on. The names are gone. The beginning multiplies in the dark. A civilization without a name is the hardest one to imagine clearly. You search for it not through royal inscriptions, but through traces too modest to boast. A pottery style spreading beyond one village. A burial custom appearing in several places. A tool form copied by hands that never met. A sacred platform repaired so often that it becomes a mound of remembered effort. No banner rises above it. No king claims it. Still, something connects the fragments. This is the kind of world archaeologists sometimes reconstruct from patterns rather than declarations. Research from major institutions such as Harvard, Stanford, and Oxford has shown that prehistoric cultural horizons can be identified through shared artifacts, settlement habits, trade materials, and ritual behaviours across wide regions. The people may not have called themselves one people. Modern scholars may still see a pattern. You walk across a plain where small settlements lie separated by distance, weather, and suspicion. Between them move travellers, herders, craft workers, marriage partners, and traders carrying shells, stone, pigments, stories, seeds, and gossip. Gossip, naturally, is one of humanity's oldest communication systems. Very efficient, rarely accurate, yet along with rumour comes imitation. A painted bowl catches someone's eye. A burial gesture seems powerful. A house plan proves useful. A sacred object travels as a gift, then becomes a local tradition. Slowly, an unnamed cultural layer spreads across the land, not through empire, but through contact. This may be what a pre-Anunnaki cultural horizon looks like. Not a lost nation with a capital, not a secret empire beneath the sand, a web of customs, rituals, technologies, and memories, strong enough to shape later civilization, but too early to speak in writing. Its people build, trade, bury, feast, fear, and remember. They have names for themselves, but those names never reach you. The silence is not empty. It is crowded. A mainstream historical fact supports this reconstruction. Archaeologists often define periods such as the Halaf, Hassuna, Samara, and Ubaid through material culture found across northern and southern Mesopotamia and nearby regions. These horizons reveal that long before written states, communities were already linked by shared styles and practices. Those names are modern. The connections are ancient. You pause beside a burial on the edge of a settlement. The grave goods are simple, perhaps beads, a vessel, a tool, or nothing at all. The body rests in a position chosen by hands that cared, feared, or obeyed custom. A child stands nearby, watching adults hide emotion behind practiced movements. Death teaches community, it says. This is how we do it. And once a group says that enough times, culture becomes stronger than any single person. A scholarly debate remains open over how unified these prehistoric horizons truly were. Some researchers see broad cultural communities with shared beliefs. Others warn that similar pottery or architecture does not always mean shared identity. Objects travel more easily than souls, which is awkward for interpretation. A bowl can cross a valley. A worldview may not follow. Still, repeated patterns suggest communication. Obsidian from distant volcanic regions appears far from its source. Shells travel inland. Stones, pigments, and metals move along exchange routes before writing records their journeys. People knew more of the world than their village horizon admitted. You imagine a trader arriving at dusk with a bundle wrapped in worn cloth. Children stare. Adults pretend to examine the goods calmly, but their attention sharpens. A dark stone blade, sharper than local material, passes from hand to hand. A bead from a far coast catches fire in lamplight. The world widens in a palm. Such exchanges may have carried myths as well as materials. A story about a flood travels with a shell. A ritual song travels with a bride. A method of sealing jars travels with a merchant. A gesture of blessing travels with a healer. No one writes the origin. Everyone adapts the use. This is how a nameless civilization can exist. Not as a kingdom. As a shared atmosphere, a quirky fringe tidbit imagines this hidden horizon as the true civilization before all known civilizations, guided by priest astronomers who encoded their knowledge in pottery designs. Professional archaeology does not support that grand claim, but pottery patterns can still reveal taste, connection, and perhaps symbolic habits. The bowl may not be a star map. It is already a message. You enter a workshop where clay vessels dry near a wall. The potter's hands move with practiced calm. He does not consider himself a bearer of world history. He is trying to make a useful object without ruining it. Yet the curve he chooses may travel beyond his lifetime. Another potter may copy it. A distant archaeologist may use it to define a period. This is unfair pressure on a pot. History is full of such accidents. The unnamed cultural horizon also helps explain why later divine systems feel so layered. When written myths finally appear, they draw from older customs that had already blended for centuries. A temple practice may descend from household offerings. A god's symbol may echo an older animal image. A sacred number may preserve repeated ritual habits. A creation story may gather many local memories into one official voice. The result looks unified. Its roots are tangled. You feel those roots beneath the plain. They run through storage pits, hearths, graves, kilns, cattle paths, marsh crossings, and seasonal gatherings. They do not ask to be famous. They simply feed the future. Every later city stands upon such unnamed inheritances. Perhaps the Anunnaki were able to become so powerful in imagination because the human world was already trained to recognize invisible hierarchy. Before divine assemblies were written, communities had seen elders meet, households organize, specialists mediate ritual, and a place has become sacred through repetition. The gods may mirror society. Society may mirror the gods. The mirror is old enough that no one knows which side began. Evening covers the landscape. Smoke rises from scattered settlements, each one small from a distance, each one immense to those who live there. Dogs bark at strangers. Lamps glow behind reed mats. A woman ties a bundle for tomorrow's journey. A child sleeps beside a bowl painted with patterns whose meaning may already be half forgotten. This is not a lost empire. It is more delicate than that. It is the deep connective tissue of early humanity, where ideas move slowly and leave uneven traces. A civilization without a name can still change everything, because names are not required for influence. The earth remembers contact through objects. The body remembers custom through practice. The mind remembers fear through ritual. You stand beneath the stars and listen to settlements breathing in the dark. No single voice explains them. No tablet gathers them into a proud origin. Yet out of these nameless networks, later worlds will inherit clay work, sacred space, labor systems, symbolic animals, burial memory, trade routes, and the habit of imagining order beyond the human eye. The unknown civilization does not need to be hidden by conspiracy. Time is enough. Time hides almost everything. And in that gentle loss, the first foundations of human order remain, not gone exactly, but dissolved into everything that came to seem eternal. The scholar's table is quiet, but the questions upon it are not. You see clay tablets, excavation plans, pottery drawings, bone reports, and photographs of walls that no longer stand. A lamp shines over everything with patient cruelty. It reveals fragments, but never the whole. The past has been broken, burned, buried, washed away, reused, and politely misfiled by time. Very inconsiderate. Yet this is where the edge of knowledge becomes most interesting. Modern archaeology does not move like myth. It moves carefully, one trench, one layer, one date, one comparison at a time. Researchers from Oxford, Yale, Stanford, and the University of Chicago have helped build the modern picture of early Mesopotamia through excavation, language study, environmental research, and the slow reading of ancient texts. The result is not a single answer. It is a disciplined uncertainty. You lean over a plan of an ancient mound. Lines mark walls, dots mark finds. Darker areas mark burning, flooding, rebuilding, or disturbance. To the untrained eye, it looks almost dull. To a patient archaeologist, it is a damaged memory palace, one room at a time. The difficulty is simple. Myth and archaeology speak different languages. A myth may say kingship descended from heaven. Archaeology finds building levels, seal impressions, food remains, and graves. A myth may say a flood destroyed the world. Archaeology finds several floods in different places, at different times, with different meanings for different communities. Neither voice is useless. Neither voice is complete. A mainstream historical fact is clear. Ancient Mesopotamian texts were copied over many generations, often long after the traditions they describe first developed. Scholars must therefore separate the date of a manuscript from the possible age of the story preserved within it. That separation is delicate. A late copy may preserve an old memory. It may also preserve a late invention dressed in antique clothing. Ancient writers were fully capable of doing that, because people have always loved making things sound older than they are. Modern people do it too, usually with furniture, recipes, and suspicious family legends. The scholarly debate remains open over how much early Mesopotamian myth reflects prehistoric events, social institutions, ritual traditions, or literary imagination. Some researchers search for memories of real floods, migrations, and older settlements. Others emphasize symbolic structure, political theology, and scribal creativity. Both sides matter. Without imagination, the past becomes dust. Without caution, it becomes fantasy. You turn a tablet photograph beneath the light. The signs are small, angled, and elegant in their own stern way. A trained reader can draw names, verbs, offerings, places, and divine titles from them. But even translation is not resurrection. A word may have several meanings. A broken line may hide the crucial phrase. A missing edge may have held the answer everyone wants. The tablet remains calm. It is very good at withholding. A quirky fringe tidbit says that mainstream scholars hide evidence of a civilization older than the Anunnaki. There is no solid basis for such a claim, but it reveals a real hunger. People sense that the official story is incomplete, and in that sense, they are right. It is incomplete because evidence is incomplete, not because a secret librarian is guarding the truth behind a velvet rope, although, admittedly, that would be dramatic. The real mystery is slower. It lies in how much careful work still cannot recover. Organic materials decay. Mud brick returns to mud. Early sacred practices may leave only ash, a pit, or a rearranged floor. Songs vanish completely unless someone writes them down, and even then, melody escapes. What did people sing? What did they fear at midnight? What names did mothers whisper over sick children? Archaeology can approach these questions, but not always enter them. It can show diet, disease, trade, construction, tool use, and burial practice. It can suggest ritual. It can compare patterns. It can build a strong frame. But the warm interior of experience often remains just beyond reach. You feel that distance. It is frustrating. It is also honest. Good scholarship keeps the mystery from collapsing into easy answers. It says that Eridu is ancient, but it does not pretend every later myth about Eridu is literal history. It says flood deposits exist, but does not force them into one global catastrophe. It says prehistoric ritual centers mattered, but it does not assign them a modern script full of secret masters. The edge is where discipline breathes. A historian sees the attraction of grand theories. One lost civilization explains everything neatly. One divine group teaches humanity all skills. One flood resets the world. One hidden code links every sacred number, every monument, every myth. It is tidy, and tidiness is seductive. The real past is less tidy. It is better. It contains many beginnings, overlapping traditions, partial memories, local disasters, borrowed symbols, political inventions, and sincere religious awe. It allows people to be clever without being guided by stars. It allows myths to be meaningful without being literal reports. It allows fragments to matter without turning every gap into proof. You sit with that thought while the lamp hums faintly. Outside the study, the modern world continues with traffic, phones, deadlines, and people arguing confidently about topics they have not read. Some traditions are timeless. Inside, the fragments remain patient. The clay does not care whether it confirms anyone's favourite theory. The soil does not flatter. Bones do not adjust themselves to suit dramatic narration. This is why archaeology can feel almost moral. It teaches humility. Not everything is knowable. Not everything unknown is false. That middle place is where this ancient mystery lives. What came before the Anunnaki may be approached through prehistoric settlement, ritual architecture, early temple development, flood memory, and inherited myth. But no single fragment stands up and announces the full answer. Perhaps that is fitting. A civilization before names would not leave a named confession. It would leave habits absorbed by later worlds. It would leave pottery, walls, offerings, burials, flood layers, and stories that speak as though their beginnings lie beyond sight. Scholars stand at the edge of these traces, holding tools in one hand and restraint in the other. Restraint is not weakness, it is respect for the dead. You close the folder of excavation notes. The room seems darker now. The clay tablets rest in their images, still carrying old signs. Somewhere beneath a mound in Iraq, another fragment may remain buried, waiting without impatience. It may clarify a detail. It may complicate everything. The past enjoys doing both. The scholar's edge is not a cliff. It is a shoreline. Evidence washes in slowly, piece by piece, and each piece changes the shape of what can be said. Beyond it lies deep water, full of tempting reflections. You can look into that water. You can wonder. You simply should not pretend the reflection is a map. And so the ancient question remains alive, not because knowledge has failed, but because honest knowledge leaves space around the unknown. The question turns inward, toward the strange usefulness of human beings. You stand in a dim temple court where the day's heat still breathes from the walls. The smell of bread, oil, wool, and clay vessels settles in the air, somewhere nearby. A door closes with a soft wooden sound. A priest pauses, listening, as if the building itself has asked for attention. The gods need care. That is the unsettling idea. In Mesopotamian religion, divine beings were often imagined as inhabiting temples through their sacred statues. These statues were washed, dressed, fed, honoured, and carried in procession. Scholars from Yale, Oxford, and the University of Chicago have studied these rites as central to the relationship between gods, cities, and human labour. The divine world was powerful. It was also strangely dependent. You move closer to the inner chamber, where the light becomes faint and golden. A table waits for offerings. Bread is placed carefully. Beer is poured. Oil gleams in a bowl. The gestures are quiet, repeated, and exact. No one behaves as though these acts are symbolic only. They are service. Service gives the temple its rhythm. Service gives people their place. A famous Mesopotamian creation tradition describes humans as made to relieve divine beings from labour. In this story world, the gods tire of digging and maintaining the earth, so humanity is fashioned to carry the burden. The myth feels practical, almost dry in its honesty. Humanity is not created to lounge beautifully beside a perfect garden. Humanity is created because work is exhausting. Ancient theology had a sense of humour, apparently. A scholarly debate remains open over how such myths reflected social realities in early states. Some researchers see them as religious explanations for temple labour and agricultural obligation. Others read them as meditations on hierarchy, dependence, and the difficult place of humans between animals and gods. Both readings lead into the same shadow. Human beings are necessary, but not supreme. You feel that tension in the courtyard. Workers bring grain, animals, textiles, fuel, and vessels. Scribes record amounts. Bakers prepare food. Brewers tend jars. Shepherds deliver animals. Women and men perform specialized tasks within a system larger than any one household. The temple appears sacred. It is also administrative. That double identity is not contradiction. It is the ancient machinery of meaning. The storehouse feeds the ritual. The ritual justifies the storehouse. Offerings move upward in thought, then outward again through human hands. The gods receive, the city organizes, and people survive within the pattern. It is elegant. It is also controlling. A quirky fringe tidbit claims the Anunnaki engineered humans as a servant species for hidden cosmic purposes. Professional historians do not accept that modern interpretation, yet the reason it grips the imagination is clear. Mesopotamian myths already contain the haunting notion that humanity was made to serve powers beyond itself. The fantasy exaggerates. The ancient question remains, why are humans here, if not to maintain a fragile order they did not create? You step into the smell of fresh bread. It is warm and comforting, which makes the idea more unsettling. Someone kneaded this dough before dawn. Someone guarded the grain from damp and insects. Someone heated the oven. The offering looks simple only because many people made it possible. The sacred rests on ordinary effort. That may be the oldest human truth in the room. Kings understood this very well. In royal inscriptions, rulers often present themselves as chosen builders, restorers, and caretakers of temples. They do not merely rule people. They repair the houses of the gods, raise walls, clear canals, and establish order. Their authority shines because it claims service to a higher order. Convenient, yes, but also serious. A king who fails the gods risks more than politics. He risks cosmic disorder, famine, defeat, disease, and the terrifying suspicion that heaven has turned away. Ordinary people may never meet the king, but they understand the system through harvests, festivals, rations, taxes, and prayers. The divine household touches everyone. A debate among historians continues over whether ancient temple economies dominated early Mesopotamian life as completely as older models suggested. Some scholars emphasize temple power. Others point to households, private exchange, and varied local arrangements. The truth appears complex, which is inconvenient for simple storytelling and excellent for reality. Ancient life was layered. Power rarely has one address. Still, the temple remained a central image for humanity's role. It taught that the world requires maintenance through correct action. Feed the god, clean the statue, recite the words, repair the canal, preserve the festival, count the grain, honor the dead, keep going. There is no final completion, only repetition made sacred. You begin to sense why creation stories place humans after divine conflict. The world, as imagined by Mesopotamian myth, is not born into perfect rest. It emerges from struggle, noise, tiredness, and need. Humanity enters as a solution, but also as another problem. People can work, but they can also multiply, rebel, neglect rights, make noise, and irritate the gods. Very relatable. Even divinity seems to have regretted management decisions. Yet this makes humanity's role more profound. Humans are not merely servants in a flat sense. They are mediators. They transform grain into offering, mud into temple, sound into prayer, and fear into ceremony. They translate earth into service that heaven can receive. That is a dangerous honour. It gives human life sacred importance while binding it to duty. The courtyard darkens as evening comes. Lamps are lit. The temple walls glow softly, and shadows move like slow water. A singer begins a hymn. The sound is low and steady, carrying words shaped by generations of repetition. The god is praised. The city is protected. The order is affirmed again. You listen, and the mystery shifts. Perhaps the old gods needed humans because gods in human imagination must be approached through human labour. A deity without offerings leaves no economy. A sacred presence without rituals leaves no institution. A cosmic order without people to enact it remains invisible. Humans make the unseen durable. They give it bread, walls, schedules, songs, and memory. This does not reduce the religion, it deepens it. The ancient world understood that meaning must be maintained physically. A belief neglected becomes faint. A shrine abandoned becomes mud. A name no longer spoken becomes silence. So humanity serves, and by serving, preserves the gods. That thought is almost forbidden. It suggests dependence flowing in both directions. People need divine order to explain and protect their world. The gods need human attention to remain present within history. Between them stands the temple, warm with bread, smoke, wool, oil, fear, gratitude, and habit. Night gathers fully. The offerings rest in dim light. A worker leaves by the outer gate, his shoulders tired and his hands smelling of grain. He may not think about theology. He may think only of sleep, family, debt, and tomorrow's tasks. Yet his labour has entered a sacred circuit older than writing and stronger than any single myth. Why do the old gods need humans? Perhaps because order is not real until someone keeps it. Perhaps because memory is not alive until someone repeats it. Perhaps because even gods, once imagined in temples, require hands in the darkness, setting bread before them before dawn. The tablet breaks exactly where you want it to speak. You hold the absence in your mind, a missing corner, a cracked line, a name lost before the sentence can breathe. The clay is not dramatic about this. It simply withholds, as old things often do, with the calm confidence of objects that have survived everyone. A gap can feel alive. It invites you closer. Ancient Mesopotamian texts often survive in fragments, copied across centuries by scribes whose tablets were broken, buried, burned, or scattered. Researchers at Yale, Oxford, and the University of Chicago have shown that reconstructing these texts requires careful comparison of duplicates, damaged lines, and later versions. This is patient work. It is also humbling. You look across a table of fragments, each one carrying partial signs. A divine name appears on one shard, a verb survives on another, a place name waits on a third, too damaged to trust completely. The scholar does not merely read the past, the scholar negotiates with it. The past is a difficult witness. It remembers selectively. The mainstream fact is clear. Many stories that shape modern understanding of ancient Mesopotamia survive through incomplete manuscripts. The famous myths, king lists, hymns, and rituals are often known through copies separated by time, place, language, and purpose. That means every confident answer has shadows around it. Not falsehood, shadows. You stand inside those shadows and notice how much depends on what cannot be restored. A missing line might have explained a god's role. A broken ending might have softened a myth's cruelty. A lost beginning might have named an older tradition that everyone later forgot. History is full of doors without handles. Naturally. This is where fringe imagination becomes lively. A quirky tidbit says the missing lines contain forbidden truths about beings before the Anunnaki, hidden because they would overturn history. Professional scholars see no evidence for such secrecy. Still, broken tablets do create a powerful emotional effect. They make the unknown feel intentional. A crack becomes a conspiracy. A gap becomes a vault. Very convenient for late-night speculation. The real mystery is quieter and more interesting. What the tablets cannot say may be missing because no one wrote it down in the first place. Early rituals, local traditions, songs, gestures, and household beliefs may have lived for thousands of years without entering formal texts. Writing preserved administration and elite memory more easily than private fear. The mother's whisper is gone. The worker's joke is gone. The child's nightmare is gone. A scholarly debate remains open over how representative written texts are of broader Mesopotamian belief. Some researchers treat them as windows into elite scribal culture. Others use them carefully alongside archaeology to approach popular religion, household ritual, and regional diversity. The caution matters. A tablet is not a civilization. It is one surviving voice among many lost voices. You imagine a small household shrine at night. No scribe records it. A woman places food near a wall. A man murmurs to a dead parent beneath the floor. A child watches, learning that some acts are done quietly because they belong to the family, not the city. No myth preserves this moment, yet it may be closer to the roots of religion than any royal hymn. The tablets speak beautifully about gods, kings, floods, and cosmic order. But they speak less often about the ordinary textures from which those grand ideas grew. They rarely tell you how a farmer felt when a field failed after offerings were made. They rarely tell you whether a servant believed the hymn he carried into the temple. They rarely tell you doubt. Doubt leaves few artifacts, and yet you can sense it between the lines. Ancient people were not simple believers moving through a mechanical, sacred world. They questioned, feared, negotiated, complained, joked, and adapted. They lived close to uncertainty. Their rituals may have strengthened faith, but also managed anxiety when faith trembled. Perhaps that is why the oldest stories remain powerful. They do not eliminate uncertainty. They give it shape. A broken tablet teaches the same lesson in material form. The story exists, but not completely. You can trace the curve of meaning, but not close your hand around it. The missing words become part of the experience, reminding you that every reconstruction is an act of respect and imagination. Too little imagination makes dust. Too much makes fiction. The balance is narrow. You look now beyond the tablets, toward the soil itself. Archaeology also has gaps. A site may be unexcavated, damaged by erosion, looting, war, construction, or groundwater. Organic materials vanish. Mud brick melts. Ancient river courses shift. Whole settlements may lie beneath modern towns or fields. The earth does not preserve evenly. It has preferences. Clay survives. Stone survives. Charred seeds sometimes survive. Songs rarely survive. Soft clothing rarely survives. Ordinary grief almost never survives unless it touches a grave. This creates a distorted mirror, where the durable seems more important simply because it lasted. You must remember that. The first civilization was not made only of what survived. It was also made of voices, smells, meals, moods, weather, misunderstandings, and hands touching doorframes in the dark. It was made of things too fragile to become evidence. Those fragile things may have shaped belief as powerfully as temples did. The hidden timeline therefore cannot be fully recovered. It can only be approached, Perhaps there were older names for divine groups before the Anunnaki. Perhaps there were local spirits absorbed into larger pantheons. Perhaps prehistoric ritual specialists became remembered as sages. Perhaps flood memories from several places blended into one enormous story. Perhaps. That word returns because honesty requires it. The open question is not a weakness. It is the doorway through which wonder can enter without trampling evidence. You do not need to pretend the tablets say more than they do. You only need to listen carefully to what their silences suggest. The lamp burns low. A fragment rests beneath glass, its edges rough, its signs firm where they remain. You feel affection for it. Oddly enough, it has carried a few words across thousands of years, and people still ask it to carry more. That is not fair. But history has never been fair to clay. Outside the study, night presses against the windows. Inside, the missing lines continue their quiet work. They prevent the story from closing too soon. They remind you that civilization's beginning was not a single sentence, not a royal claim, not one god's command, not one tablet's confession. It was a long gathering of practices, disasters, hopes, and explanations. Many of them lost before writing could reach them. What the tablets cannot say may be the oldest part, the unwritten layer, the human layer, the part made of breath before clay, memory before script, fear before theology, and small gestures before temples learn to name the gods who receive them. The broken edge remains silent, and in that silence, the mystery grows gentler, wider, and more true. The story settles at last into a darkness older than any name. You stand where several worlds seem to meet, river mud beneath your feet and a cold sky above you. The reeds move softly, the water carries broken starlight. Somewhere beyond the plain, buried walls sleep beneath fields, roads, towns, and the quiet weight of centuries. Nothing answers all at once. That is fitting. The oldest civilizations do not reveal themselves like opened books. They appear as layers, each one resting upon another, each one hiding and preserving what came earlier. Archaeological research from Oxford, Yale, Stanford, and major scientific journals confirms that early civilization grew through long processes of settlement, farming, ritual, exchange, labor, and memory. So the beginning is not a point, it is a deepening. The Anunnaki enter written history as powerful figures in Mesopotamian imagination, but they do not stand at the first edge of human meaning. Beneath them lie village rites, ancestor memories, river fears, sacred buildings, flood stories, strange figurines, temple platforms, carved stones, and nameless traditions carried through generations. The gods received a world already prepared. That thought is quiet, but it changes everything. A scholarly debate remains open over how much early myth preserves real prehistoric memory. Some researchers hear echoes of floods, social change, and ancient ritual specialists. Others emphasize literature, theology, and political imagination. Between these views lies the honest middle ground, where myth is neither simple fact nor empty invention. It is memory shaped by meaning. It is truth-wearing ritual clothing. A quirky fringe tidbit insists that something vast and hidden came before all known civilizations. Perhaps that claim reaches too far, yet the feeling beneath it is understandable. The official record is full of gaps, not because truth is being hidden, but because time is a patient thief. Time takes names first, then songs, then faces. You look across the ancient plain and see no single lost empire waiting to be restored. Instead, you sense something subtler, a long human preparation spread across villages, shrines, river valleys, highland monuments, crowded houses, graves, fields, and workshops. Humanity learned order slowly, through fear and need. It learned to stay, it learned to count, it learned to return to sacred places, it learned to bury the dead close enough to remember. It learned that water could bless and destroy. It learned that unseen powers needed gestures, offerings, houses, names, and repetition. Perhaps that is what came before the Anunnaki. Not one race, not one vanished throne, not one perfect first city, but the slow making of a mind ready for gods. A human world already trained to see pattern in floodwater, command in the sky, wisdom in old teachers, and obligation in stored grain. The first civilization may have been less like a sunrise and more like mist. It gathered quietly, it thickened around rivers and hearths, it became visible only when writing finally gave her edges. By then, the story was already ancient. Scribes pressed signs into clay, but the oldest meanings had been pressed into bodies, seasons, walls, and graves for thousands of years. The tablet did not create memory. It caught memory as it was passing, and still so much escaped. You hear the faint scrape of a reed stylus. You hear grain poured into a jar. You hear water against a bank at night. You hear stones being lifted before writing, before kings, before any name survived long enough to comfort the living. These sounds do not solve the mystery. They deepen it. The Anunnaki may be the figures we can name, but the world beneath them remains filled with unnamed builders, mourners, workers, singers, watchers, and teachers. They are the true foundation, not because they knew they were first, but because they made firstness possible. The river moves in darkness. The stars remain distant. A tablet rests somewhere under glass, still broken, still patient. It does not give you a final answer. It gives you a direction, downward into layers, backward into silence, inward toward the old human need to turn fear into order and order into story. Perhaps the first civilization was never one thing. Perhaps it was the moment humans began building memory outside the body. A wall, a grave, a shrine, a mark in clay, and perhaps, beneath every god ever named, there remains that older human gesture, a hand reaching into darkness with an offering, hoping something unseen will understand. Now the night softens, the ancient plain grows quiet, and even the river seems to lower its voice. You do not need to hold every name, every date, every broken tablet. Let them loosen gently. Let Eridu sink back into moonlit dust. Let the carved stones return to their hills. Let the reed marsh breathe under stars that have watched every beginning and every forgetting. The workers have gone home. The scribes have set down their tools. The temples are dark, but not empty. Somewhere in the older silence, a seed rests in earth. A wall cools after sunset, and a bowl waits beside a doorway. These small things remain, soft and ordinary, carrying the weight of worlds without asking to be praised. You breathe slowly. The mystery does not close. It folds around you like night air, calm, wide, and patient. Perhaps what came before the Anunnaki was not meant to be captured completely. Perhaps it was meant to be approached in fragments, through mud, water, stone, and sleep. Perhaps the first civilization is still beneath us, not only in the ground, but in the way humans keep building meaning from fear. The river continues, the stars continue, and perhaps the story is not yet complete. End of script. Good night.